Eddard Stark could feel the chill of dread settling in his bones even as the warmth of the midday sun beat down on the stone courtyard of the Red Keep. He stood there, chains clinking around his wrists, mind swirling with guilt and sorrow and a quiet, steadfast determination not to die a traitor. The crowds were a blur, shouting, jeering, some with pity in their eyes, others with hatred. He could taste the tang of dust on his lips. He remembered his children's faces. Arya spirited and fierce, Sansa trembling and frightened, Robb and Bran and Rickon far away in Winterfell. Even if he were fated for death, he had to keep them safe. But the dread within him had not extinguished his sense of justice or the love he bore for his family. When he was shoved forward to the scaffold, the history of his life weighed heavy on him. Every step forward brought him closer to his looming fate. He heard the rasp of steel, the Kingsguard clearing the path, their white cloaks shining, and in the distance, the gold of Lannister armor glinting beneath the sunlight. High on the wooden stage, the memory of his own father's death, burned alive by the Mad King, flared in his mind. This was how everything ended. This was the tragedy that had shaped him. And now, ironically, it seemed as though it would claim him too, albeit under a different king and a different set of machinations. He knelt. The crowd roared as swords bristled around him, and he felt hands on his shoulders pressing him down. Lord Varys watched from a distance, his expression inscrutable, but there was the faintest flicker of sorrow in those pale eyes. Littlefinger stood closer, lips curled into something akin to regret or satisfaction. Ned could never tell with him. Grand Maester Pycelle's beard twitched in the light breeze, and the newly pronounced King Joffrey sat perched on the Iron Throne's dais, a crooked, eager smile lighting his cruel face. Cersei Lannister lingered to one side, looking less triumphant than Ned would have expected. But she did not intervene. Sansa's voice rose above the crowd. She shouted, and though the words blurred, Ned recognized her cries. She was begging for his life. A father's heart nearly broke at the desperation in his daughter's voice. He had claimed himself a traitor for her sake, to protect her and hopefully Arya as well. He had hoped for mercy, but that hope was slipping away with each passing moment. The young king would never be satisfied with simple submission. Ned could see Joffrey's eyes glitter like a serpent's. He wanted blood, a spectacle. Yet, even as the drum of horror pounded in Ned's chest, he felt the ghost of some plans stirring in the background. He recalled a moment, so brief he nearly missed it, when Varys had come to him in the Black Cells and whispered of certain possibilities. There had been talk of the Night's Watch, of bargains, of mercy if Ned confessed. But there had also been the veiled possibility of an escape. Some arrangement for Arya's safety, Sansa's freedom, something to do with gold and influences behind the scenes. It had seemed improbable. He had not believed it. But now, as the sword was being drawn for his head, he recalled the parting words, "My lord, do not lose hope." Cersei opened her mouth to speak, but Joffrey cut her off. Ned saw a flash of vexation in the Queen Regent's green eyes. Joffrey's young voice shrilled through the courtyard. "Bring me his head," he said, as if awarding himself a gift. There was a horrified gasp. Cersei began to protest, but Joffrey would not be swayed. That was the moment Ned believed all was lost. The crowd roared anew, a savage chant that mixed with the pounding of Ned's heart. The executioner raised his sword. Ned lowered his head, eyes shut, and he prayed to the old gods for his children. He whispered their names, Sansa, Arya, Robb, Bran, Rickon, and in the darkness behind his closed eyes he saw a flash of gray fur like a dire wolf howling in the winter night. He heard a voice from somewhere beyond the dais. "Sansa! Arya!" he managed to call out, though he couldn't see Arya anywhere in the crowd. Perhaps she had fled or hidden away as Yoren had suggested. He hoped she was far gone. The blade swept forward. A swirl of something cut the air. He expected white-hot agony or final darkness, but neither came. Instead, he felt a rush of air crackling near his ears. A metallic clang echoed over the courtyard. He opened his eyes. The headsman's blade had met another blade, narrow, gleaming Valyrian steel, bearing that distinctive ripple. Shocked gasps rippled across the crowd. Ned jerked upright and saw that the man who had blocked the blow wore the cloak of a Kingsguard, though in the chaos Ned could not identify which knight. Possibly Ser Barristan? That made no sense. Barristan had been dismissed, cast out by Cersei. Or was it someone else in pale, glimmering armor, a visor down, face concealed? A hush fell, if only for an instant. Whispers flew, treason, confusion, sabotage. Ned found himself staring at the phantom king's guard who held the executioner's sword at bay. A moment later, the man pivoted, smashing the hilt of his weapon into the executioner's face, sending the large man reeling. Blood spurted from the headsman's mouth as he toppled sideways. And then all 7 hells broke loose. Littlefinger shouted something. Guards rushed forward. Ned felt rough hands yank him back. But as soon as they seized him, a second figure burst onto the scaffold. This one wore plain leathers, face partially hidden by a hood. He spun and cut through Ned's chains with a short, precise strike. Ned's wrists came free, the broken chains clanking to the platform boards. The pain in his shoulders flared, but he forced himself to stand, heart roaring in his ears. This hooded rescuer pressed a dagger into Ned's hand and hissed, "Run, my lord." Then the slender figure whirled, diving into a crowd of gold-cloaked guards. Ned recognized the voice. Was it a disguised man of the City Watch who still held loyalty to House Stark, or was it an agent of Varys? He did not know. The courtyard had descended into chaos. People screamed, scattered, shoved. Sansa's wail was lost in the uproar. Joffrey was bellowing from his perch, "Seize him. Seize them all." Cersei shrieked for order, though her voice was quickly drowned out. Several members of the King's Guard advanced on Ned, swords bared, while the gold cloaks hesitated, uncertain whom to follow. The 2 unknown allies fought with a furious efficiency, cutting down one guard, tossing aside another. They moved like phantoms, quick, brutal, purposeful. Ned's first instinct was to protect his daughter. He looked out into the throng, searching for the auburn hair he knew so well. But the crush of bodies and swirling color made her impossible to see. Over the roar, he heard a voice, "Stark. This way." He spared one last glance at the dais where Joffrey stood, mouth twisted in a child's cruelty. Then Ned jumped down from the scaffold with a grunt, ankles jarring as he hit the ground. He ducked beneath the guard's swinging sword, stumbling across the courtyard as people fled. The dagger in his hand felt pitifully small, but it was better than nothing. Panic thrummed through every inch of him. Could he truly escape? He had to move, had to find Arya and Sansa both if he could. The next few moments were a blur of chaos, the hiss of steel, the screams of common folk trying to flee the riot, the swirl of battered cloaks and soldiers' shouts. Varys appeared suddenly at Ned's shoulder, face haunted, eyes wide. "My lord," he said breathlessly, "this is your moment. Go." He gestured toward a narrow passage leading away from the main yard. "Your daughter's life depends on it." Ned's heart nearly stopped. "Which one?" he croaked. "Sansa is being pulled away by Sandor Clegane. He's obeying the Queen's orders to protect her," Varys said quickly, urging Ned onward. "They won't kill her, not yet. They need her for the sake of legitimacy, or so Cersei believes." Another urgent push. "As for Arya, I've arranged her removal from the city, but there is no time to explain. You must trust me." "Trust you?" Ned echoed. But the sounds of clashing swords left no room for extended debate. He had no choice, for in that instant, 3 gold cloaks rushed at him. Ned ducked beneath a spear thrust, adrenaline surging in his weary limbs. He slashed with the dagger, managing to open a shallow cut on one guard's leg. The man stumbled, cursing. The second guard aimed a blow at Ned's head with the flat of his sword. Ned raised his arms, the strike hammered him to his knees. He might have died there if not for Varys, who somehow brandished a slender blade of his own, stepping in to parry the next thrust. Surprised, the gold cloak faltered. Varys was no warrior, but in that moment he showed surprising deftness, or perhaps cunning. He blocked the man's sword just long enough for Ned to push himself back up. The 2 unknown allies from the scaffold reappeared, cutting down the guards with ruthless efficiency before vanishing again into the tumult. Varys gripped Ned's arm. "We must flee now." Ned's voice shook with rage. "I will not abandon my daughter." "She is safer without you at this moment," Varys insisted, and there was a rare tremor in his tone, an urgency that Ned could not dismiss. "Clegane is under orders to guard her, and if you are captured, your head will truly end up on a spike. If you want to save your family, come with me now." The courtyard was a hell's cape of swirling bodies. Archers on the surrounding walls were knocking arrows but hesitated to shoot into the crowd for fear of hitting Lannister men or watchers of rank. Cersei was screaming at them to release, while Joffrey demanded they kill Ned Stark. Ned saw the boy's face contorted in frustration. He wanted the spectacle of Ned's demise. But chaos was not easily controlled, and the City Watch had not been fully prepared for this. Ned steeled himself. Every muscle in his body burned, but he set his jaw. If he survived, perhaps Robb might still call the banners in the north. Perhaps Sansa would be held hostage but alive. He had to trust that there would be time to negotiate or rescue her. Arya, he prayed, had indeed escaped as Yoren had promised. He had no more time to think. They wove through the labyrinthine back passages of the Red Keep, Varys leading the way with surprising agility. Servants and lesser officials gaped at the sight of Ned Stark running through the halls, half-bound, bruised, bloodied, with the Master of Whisperers at his side. Many simply shrank away or dropped whatever they were carrying and fled. A few tried to bar the path, but Varys had gold or threats or quick words that parted them. They pressed onward, hearts pounding. At last, they reached a cramped corridor that ended at a thick wooden door barred from the inside. Varys slipped a key from his voluminous sleeve. The passage down to the catacombs, he explained breathlessly. Not entirely known, but I have my ways. Ned's breath caught. He knew rumors of the Red Keep's secret passages, but had never roamed them. He wondered how many secrets Varys truly possessed. There was no time for wonder, though. Varys unlocked the door, they slipped through, and the darkness enveloped them. Torches lined the walls at intervals, dusty and thick with cobwebs. Varys lit one. They descended narrow steps carved of damp stone. The air grew cold and stale, the smell of ancient waters and mold thick in Ned's nostrils. His mind reeled with everything that had happened in the space of mere moments. Joffrey's near-execution order. The mysterious knights who had intervened. The sudden flight. And behind it all, a promise of a future that had not yet collapsed. They reached a level floor of stone. Varys guided him through twisting pathways, past sealed wooden doors, half-flooded tunnels, echoing archways. Once, Ned thought he heard rats scurrying. Above them, the city's uproar continued, though muffled and distant. Finally, they emerged into a hidden stable behind a thick tapestry in what appeared to be a storeroom near the stables of the Red Keep. The roar of King's Landing traffic drifted faintly from the other side of the walls. Varys led Ned to a horse saddled in plain tack. Here, Varys said, handing the reins to Ned. Take this. You must ride swiftly. Disguise yourself if you can. I will have the city watch searching the main gates, but there are other ways out. Ned took the reins, feeling the tremor in his own hands. Varys, he said, voice rough from thirst and shock, why help me? Is it truly for the realm? The eunuch's eyes flickered with an emotion Ned could not parse. I serve the realm, yes. But more than that, I wish to avoid the bloodshed that would surely follow your public beheading. The Lannisters believe they are cunning, but they do not see all ends. War is upon us, Lord Stark, yet how it unfolds might yet be shaped. He paused, a sad smile ghosting across his lips. You have always been an honorable man. If you can make it north, the Seven Kingdoms may yet have hope. Ned's jaw tightened. He felt a wave of guilt for ever doubting the man, though the Master of Whisperers was notoriously untrustworthy in many ways. But at this moment, Ned had no choice. He bowed his head in thanks. There are friends you'll find along the way, Varys said quickly. I have arranged for gold hidden in the saddlebags and a few provisions. Avoid the main roads. The Lannisters will spread word that you are a traitor. If you can, gather what allies remain. Robb Stark must know you are alive. Ned mounted the horse. His heart twisted at the thought of leaving Sansa in the clutches of the Lannisters, but there was no choice. She would be safer if Joffrey believed Ned still captive or missing. He swallowed hard. I will find a way to free my daughter, Ned promised, though whether to Varys or to himself, he wasn't certain. And I will remember your help. Varys nodded. Go quickly, my lord. May the gods be with you. Then Ned kicked the horse into motion, slipping out of the storeroom into the stables. Guards were shouting somewhere behind, but in the confusion he managed to steer the horse around the corner and onto a small side road outside the Red Keep. The city lay before him in winding streets, smoky air, and oblivious crowds. He pressed on, trying to hide his face in the horse's mane. He could not dawdle, the gold cloaks would soon be dispatched in every direction. He knew King's Landing's roads well enough from his time as Hand of the King, but there were many lesser routes. He took the twisting alleys, ignoring stares and curses as he nearly trampled stray dogs and beggars in his haste. As he rode, half lost in frantic thought, images of Sansa's terror or Arya's searching eyes haunted him. Then came the thought of Catelyn, somewhere in the Riverlands, and Robb in the north, marshalling forces. Perhaps the rumor of Ned's capture had already reached them. They might be at war with the Crown, with the Lannisters. But now Ned lived. If he could rally the northern lords under his living banner, if he could secure an alliance with Renly or Stannis, he might yet free his daughter and force the Lannisters to sue for peace. The clang of alarm bells tore him from his reverie. The city watch was out in force. Ned pressed onward, crossing a narrow bridge over the Blackwater Rush. His plan was to exit the city through a lesser-known postern gate along the walls. He knew one near the mud gate that sometimes was left with fewer guards. But as he approached, he saw a line of gold-cloaked watchmen scanning the faces of every rider trying to pass. He pulled away and circled back into a labyrinth of side streets. On a corner, he spied a boy hawking roast nuts who looked up curiously as Ned halted his horse. Mindful of watchers, Ned tried to speak quietly. Where can a man slip out of the city unbothered? The boy tilted his head. Might try the river gate at night, M-Lord, or the secret ways under Flea Bottom. Ned nodded his thanks, tossed the boy a coin. The child, wide-eyed, scrambled away. Under Flea Bottom it was. Ned dismounted, tying his horse to a post behind a rundown stable, but not before opening the saddlebags to find a hooded cloak. He wrapped it around his shoulders to hide his face. The stench of Flea Bottom grew more pungent with every step. Perhaps if fortune favored him, no one would look too closely at a hooded man picking his way through the slums. He ducked into the warren of cramped alleyways. Dingy doorways, the reek of waste, the hum of desperate life. He had come here before, in search of Robert's bastards, to uncover the truth about Joffrey's parentage. The memory stung. He found it twistedly ironic that he was now using these same streets to flee Joffrey's wrath. At a crossroads where greasy smoke wafted from cook fires, he heard a cry behind him. A gold cloak. Ned froze as the guard barked at a passing man. State your name and business. The man stammered some excuse and the guard shoved him aside. Another guard came into view. Ned pressed against a wall, heart hammering. He scanned the area. Up ahead, there was a narrow passage leading into shadow. Under the eaves of a crumbling building, a small door stood. Ned slipped inside. It led to a winding corridor full of rats and foul-smelling water. Yet he pressed on, stepping carefully, straining to listen for footsteps behind him. Eventually, the corridor opened into a half-collapsed tunnel. The walls were damp stone, likely older than the Targaryens, older than memory. Broken crates and debris littered the path. But a faint draft whispered from ahead. Clenching his jaw, Ned moved forward. His knife felt meager in his hand, but he could not afford to fight a squad of guards anyway. Stealth was his only ally now. Time dragged in that darkness. Every scuttle of a rat echoed like a horn blast in Ned's ears. His thoughts churned. Sansa's predicament, the North's uncertain future, the chaos that must be unfolding in the Red Keep. If he could just slip out, if he could ride north, if he could bring the truth to the lords loyal to House Stark, then perhaps a shred of hope remained for a reunited family. He climbed over fallen stones, ignoring the sting of bruised ribs and the dull ache in his wrists where the chains had chafed. At last, he saw a glimmer of light, a half-rotted wooden door that led out onto a quiet bank by the Blackwater Rush. He pressed against it gently. It gave way with a creak. The city's monstrous walls loomed behind him, and the river's murky waters churned a few feet from the bank. The stench of mud and sewage assaulted him, but the open air felt like a gift. He edged outside. The sun had begun its descent, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. From here, away from the main thoroughfares, he saw no sign of immediate pursuit. He stepped carefully along the muddy bank, scanning for a small boat or anything that might help him cross. The main gates were likely sealed, and the watchers at the docks might be suspicious of any traveler. About 100 yards upriver, he found a rickety skiff tied to a crooked post. It was barely more than a rowboat, but it might serve. With quiet haste, Ned slipped aboard. He fumbled with the rope, freed it, and found a single oar in the bottom. He pushed off from shore. The current caught him, swirling in eddies around half-submerged debris. The row was clumsy. Ned had never been much of a boatman, but necessity lent him strength. He worked the single oar as best he could, letting the current carry him downstream past the city's looming walls. Occasionally, he spotted patrol boats scanning the waters. He ducked low, praying the failing light would cloak him. The river's flow jostled him, nearly spilling him overboard more than once. Bit by bit, King's Landing receded behind him. He passed under the shadow of the massive walls, drifting beyond the line of watchfires. The last patrol boat churned by, heading back to the city. As dusk deepened, Ned let out a shaky breath. He had done it, or so it seemed. He had escaped. He was battered, grieving, but alive. Night fell in earnest, and the river became a ribbon of black ink. Ned managed to steer the boat to a small, wooded bank on the southern side. The tide was taking him east toward the sea, but he knew he must turn north if he was to reach his homeland. He dragged the skiff ashore and collapsed onto the damp bank, chest heaving. He had no time to truly rest, but he was exhausted beyond measure. He fumbled with the saddlebags slung over his shoulder. Varys had provided them, presumably intending Ned to find a horse later. Inside, he found a pouch of gold dragons, some silver stags, and a folded piece of parchment with a crude map. It showed a route from King's Landing up through the Kingswood, marked with safe houses or contacts known to the Spider. Ned gave a grim laugh, to think he would rely on Varys's network. But such was the world now. He also found hard bread, dried meat, and a small waterskin. He ate sparingly, forcing down just enough to steady his shaking limbs. Then he clutched the dagger in his hand, scanning the shadows for any threat. The night was cool, a gentle wind rustling the reeds along the river's edge. For a moment, Ned allowed himself to think of home, Winterfell's towering walls, the crisp northern air, the ancient godswood where the heart tree watched over them. He whispered a prayer. That night, he slept fitfully among the reeds. The boat pulled up beside him, hidden behind a fallen log. Dreams haunted him. The Mad King's cruelty, Robert's boisterous laughter, the White Walkers he feared lay beyond the wall, the conspiracies of the court. He startled awake several times, certain that Lannister men had found him. But only the dark silence greeted him. By first light he was stiff and chilled. He rose, splashed water on his face from the river, and tested his limbs. Still sore, but he could move. He looked at the crude map by the early sun's glow. The King's Road was dangerous. The Lannisters would have outriders posted. The map suggested a smaller path through the edges of the Kingswood, circling wide around major villages. That path would eventually cross a minor tributary. From there, he could angle northwest until he reached Harrenhal or beyond, if the gods were merciful. He had no horse, but he hoped to find one at some farm or from one of Varys's rumored contacts. He set off on foot, leaving the skiff behind. The forest quickly closed in, the calls of morning birds a fragile backdrop to his tense, hurried footsteps. He felt conspicuous, though in truth no one would likely spot a single traveler in these woods. Near midday, he came upon a small clearing with a worn-down hut. Smoke curled from its chimney. He approached cautiously, scanning for any sign of Lannister banners or gold cloaks. None. A ragged old man sat outside, whittling a piece of wood. On seeing Ned approach, the old man leaned forward with keen interest. "Hail, traveler," he called, voice cracking. "You look near half-dead." Ned lowered his hood. "Just hungry, friend," he replied. His noble accent was unmistakable, though he tried to keep his tone neutral. The old man's eyes narrowed. "Noble from the city, eh?" he said, spitting into the dirt. "Trouble's brewing that way." Ned forced a faint smile. "Indeed. Wouldn't be the first to slip out. I've had a few come by in the night, paying for a night's rest. War's in the air, they say." Ned nodded. "May I trade you a few coins for some bread and perhaps a horse if you have one?" The old man eyed him. "I've an old mare, not the fastest, but she'll get you away." "Coin in gold." Ned reached into his pouch. He handed over a gold dragon. The old man's eyes widened as he turned the coin in his hand, chewing his lip. "That's more in a fair trade. Let me fetch some provisions and your horse." With surprising agility, the man hobbled around the back of the hut. Ned couldn't help glancing around warily. He half expected a crossbow bolt to fly at his back. But the old man returned with a small bundle of bread, cheese, and salted fish, and behind him trotted a sway-backed mare with kind, tired eyes. "She's called Clover," the old man said, patting the horse's flank. "Stubborn but sure-footed." Ned carefully placed another silver stag in the man's hand, a gesture of goodwill. "Thank you," he said simply, then busied himself with saddling the mare using tack the old man provided. It was worn but serviceable. "If you take that path yonder, it'll lead you through the wood. Keep heading north when you reach the fork," the old man offered. "You'll find a small crossing over the Windwater. Might be watchers, might not. Keep your wits about you." Ned thanked him and mounted the mare. His ribs twinged, but he gritted his teeth. As he set off, the old man called after him, "Gods keep you." The next days blurred into a tense journey through the Kingswood. Ned kept away from the main roads, steering Clover along deer trails and old cart paths. Twice he spotted columns of Lannister men, hard-eyed riders scanning the area. He hid among thick brush until they passed. The news they shouted to one another in passing was chilling. "Ned Stark has fled the city. The bastard must be caught." They gossiped about the uproar in the Red Keep, how Lord Baelish was furious, how Joffrey was out for blood, how the Queen and her small council were desperate to recapture the traitor. Hearing their anger at first made Ned's guts twist with guilt and worry. He had left Sansa behind, but each time he reminded himself there was no other way. He had a chance now to gather support and perhaps broker her release. Another time he heard the riders mention a bounty on Ned's head, 1,000 dragons. Enough to tempt any Sellsword or lowly peasant. He touched the hilt of his dagger and resolved to keep his hood firmly in place whenever he encountered strangers. The forest felt endless. The nights were cold and the days weighed on him. He rose each morning sore, haunted by uncertain dreams. Images of Joffrey's grin flickered in the corners of his vision. He heard Sansa's pleas echo in his mind. But he pressed on because that was all he could do. Finally, he reached the Windwater crossing at dusk on the 5th day. The crossing was a shallow ford, the water glimmering in moonlight. A single watchfire burned on the far bank, a cluster of men warming themselves. They wore the red cloak of House Lannister. Ned cursed under his breath. He could attempt to slip across downstream, but they might spot him. He dismounted out of sight and studied the terrain. The forest pressed close to the river. The men three, from the look of them, occupied a vantage that gave them a view of the crossing. Their horses were tied nearby. Ned eased back into the brush and led Clover softly downstream. The undergrowth was thick, the ground uneven. But at last, he found a place where the river's current was calmer, the water shallow enough to ford. He guided Clover into the water, praying she would not neigh too loudly. The cold water surged around them. Clover snorted and pawed the current, but Ned shushed her gently, keeping a firm hand on her bridle. Step by step, they moved across. The night was still, the only sound the rush of water and the faint crackle of the watchman's fire. Ned peered through the dark. The men were half a mile upstream, their silhouettes faint. Then, just as Clover's hooves touched the rocky bank on the opposite side, an arrow hissed through the air and struck the water, sending a small plume of spray. Ned's heart lurched. They had been spotted. "Stop there," a voice bellowed from the direction of the watchfire. "In the name of King Joffrey, lay down your arms." Ned urged Clover up the bank as swiftly as he could. Another arrow zipped overhead, lost in the trees. The watchers were in pursuit, scrambling for their horses. Ned had to get deeper into the forest cover. The mare scrambled up the slick rocks, hooves sliding, but Ned pressed her on. He heard the watchers' horses splashing into the river. He broke into a gallop through the dark wood. Low branches slapped at his face, brambles tore at his legs. The night air rushed by. The watchers were close behind, shouting curses. Clover was old, but fear lent her speed. Ned urged her onward, zigzagging among the thick trunks. An arrow thudded into a tree inches from Ned's shoulder. He gritted his teeth, weaving to present a harder target. In the gloom, the watchers might find it difficult to maintain pursuit without risking broken necks. But these were Lannister men, persistent, well-trained. He caught glimpses of torchlight bobbing between the trees, the thunder of hooves drawing nearer. Suddenly, the ground dropped away beneath him, a steep ravine. Ned yanked on the reins, but Clover lost her footing, sending them tumbling down a short slope. He landed hard, rolling, biting back a cry as a sharp rock caught his side. Clover stumbled but managed to stay upright. Ned staggered to his feet, dizzy with pain. He pulled himself back onto the saddle, cursing under his breath. The watcher's torchlight glowed at the top of the ravine. Their voices echoed, "He's down there." Ned kicked Clover forward. The bottom of the ravine was choked with brush and a narrow stream. The mare slogged through. In the faint moonlight, Ned spotted a tight cluster of trees that might hide him if the watchers only scanned from above. He steered Clover there, dismounted, and slipped into the thick undergrowth, urging the mare to remain quiet. Moments later, he saw the torch glow at the ridge overhead, heard the watchers cursing. One man dismounted, sliding partially down, searching. Ned stood still, scarcely daring to breathe. His side throbbed. "He must have broken his neck," another man said from above. "We'll find the body come morning." "Or he's crawled away like a wounded dog," the first growled. They continued arguing for a time. But the ravine was steep and the moonlight was not strong enough to give them clarity. Eventually, grudgingly, the watchers seemed to decide that no single man could survive such a fall unscathed. They retreated. The glow of the torches withdrew, the hoofbeats faded. Ned allowed himself to exhale. Pain flared in his ribs, but he forced himself not to cry out. He leaned against Clover's flank, trembling with adrenaline. Dawn was hours away, so he settled for moving farther into the ravine, seeking a place where the canopy might hide him completely. When morning came, the watchers might search below. Ned had to be gone by then. He led Clover deeper through the ravine, traveling slowly in the dark. Eventually, they found a spot where the stream flattened, allowing them to exit the ravine on the far side. It was a grueling climb, especially with Ned's bruised body. By the time he emerged, gray light was seeping into the eastern sky. He pressed on, though the horse was exhausted and his limbs screamed for rest. As the sun rose, the forest grew quiet and still. Birds sang, oblivious to Ned's precarious plight. He chewed on stale bread and a bit of salted fish, forcing it down. He had to keep moving north. Days stretched into a week. Ned avoided any settlements that seemed too large or too close to the main road. He slept under trees or in abandoned huts, always wary of watchers. His supply of food dwindled. Clover grew more listless, her old joints complaining. More than once, Ned found evidence of Lannister riders, hoofprints, discarded campfires. The realm was truly at war now, or near it. On the 9th day since his escape, Ned finally reached a region where the wide plains replaced dense forest. He recognized the land close to the northern part of the Riverlands. Here, small villages dotted the horizon. Smoke from chimneys rose into the sky. Ned yearned for a real bed, but he dared not risk it. He thought of rallying at Harrenhal, the massive fortress on the God's Eye, once promised to Peter Baelish but now in uncertain control. But rumors suggested Tywin Lannister might already be on the march. Harrenhal might be too dangerous. Another route was to join his wife, Catelyn, who had been negotiating in the Riverlands with her father's bannermen. If he could find her, they could travel north together. The days blurred as he pressed on. He gleaned scattered news from peasants on the road. Riverrun was under threat. Tywin Lannister's forces had been raiding. Robb Stark was calling the banners in the north, leading a host southward, rumors said. That gave Ned some heart. Robb, his son, leading the north? War was indeed upon them. One afternoon, he spied riders approaching. Fearing Lannisters, he guided Clover into a thicket, crouching with his dagger ready. But as they drew closer, Ned recognized the banner of the Tully Trout. Relief flooded him. He stepped out, arms raised, calling quietly, "Hail, friends." The riders started, hands on their sword hilts. Then one, a tall man with sandy hair, peered at Ned with astonishment. "By the gods! Lord Stark." Ned stepped forward, keeping his hood back so they could see his face. "Aye," he said, voice husky. "I am Ned Stark. I need to see Lady Catelyn or Ser Edmure Tully if they're hereabouts." The men exchanged glances of disbelief. Finally, the tall man nodded. "We'd heard you were imprisoned or dead." "The tales vary. My lord, Lady Catelyn is at Moat Cailin, or so the last tidings said. Ser Edmure is holed up in Riverrun. But I ride with the outriders of Lord Jason Mallister, patrolling these borders." Ned felt a wave of relief so potent it nearly knocked him down. "How far is Riverrun from here?" 2 days' ride if the roads stay clear. But be warned, there are Lannister patrols." Ned nodded. "I must get there. Or to Lady Catelyn, whichever is closer." The man dismounted, a respectful bow crossing his features. "My lord, it is an honor to see you alive. We will escort you. Our captain will want to hear your story." Thus, Ned found himself riding in company at last, the outriders forming a protective ring around him. He could hardly believe this turn of fortune. He learned from them that Robb was indeed marching south with the northern bannermen, Karstarks, Umbers, Manderleys, all the great houses. They intended to meet the Lannisters in battle. Catelyn was likely with Robb or negotiating alliances. The outriders themselves were under Lord Mallister's command, scouting for Lannister raids and keeping the roads safe for Tully peasants seeking refuge. When they halted to camp that night, the outriders offered Ned hot stew and a place by the fire. They seemed in awe, seeing him disheveled, half-starved, battered by his flight. He told them only the basics, that he had escaped King Joffrey's attempt at execution, that Sansa remained a captive, that war was inevitable. He did not elaborate on who had helped him or the details of the plot. That knowledge might be too dangerous to share freely. The captain of the outriders, a grizzled man named Ser Willen, listened gravely. "Then it's war indeed," he said softly. "Your son will be glad to see you, my lord. Your safe return changes everything." Ned felt a pang. He hoped so. Perhaps with the rightful Lord of Winterfell alive, the North's cause would have an unshakable pillar. But would it save Sansa? Would it stop Joffrey's cruelty? So many questions remained. Over the next 2 days, they made steady progress westward. Patrols of Lannister men roamed the region, but the outriders knew the land well enough to avoid large confrontations. They clashed briefly with a band of Lannister scouts at dawn of the second day. Ned fought alongside them, his old instincts flaring. Though he lacked a proper sword, he disarmed one foe with his dagger and claimed the man's steel. He felt the weight of a longsword in his grip again, familiar and just. The skirmish ended with 3 Lannisters dead and the rest fleeing. None of the outriders were killed, though a few were wounded. Finally, they approached the wide river that fronted Riverrun. The ancient Tully castle rose beyond the water, banners draped upon its walls, watchfires flickering. The outriders signaled, and from the ramparts came an answering horn blast. By dusk, they were crossing the drawbridge. Ned's breath caught at the sight of the Tully sigils fluttering overhead. This castle felt almost like a second home, Caitlyn's childhood seat. Sir Edmure Tully himself met them in the courtyard, flanked by a dozen men-at-arms. His face was pale, his eyes rimmed with exhaustion. But when he saw Ned dismount, bruised and alive, shock and relief waged war on his features. "Gods be good," Edmure breathed, taking Ned's arm. "We thought all the ravens said you were condemned a traitor, that you were—" He shook his head, searching Ned's face. "Caitlyn will weep with joy to know you live." Ned inclined his head. "We must send word to her at once. And to Robb. The truth must be known." He looked around, seeing the bustle of war preparation within Riverrun's walls, crates of arrows, forging of spears, knights conferring with one another. "The realm is on the brink, Edmure. We must coordinate our forces before it's too late." Edmure nodded, gesturing for Ned to come inside. "Indeed, brother. We've been harried by Lord Tywin's men. Uncle Brynden does what he can to hold them at bay. But everything has changed now that you're here. Come, let's have you bathed and fed. We'll talk in the great hall." Ned allowed himself a deep sigh. He was among friends, at least for the moment. But relief warred with dread, because now that he had found refuge, the next step loomed large. He had to plan how to save Sansa, how to ensure Arya's safety, how to join forces with Robb to break the Lannisters' power or perhaps force a negotiation. A heavy burden, but he shouldered it without complaint. In Riverrun's great hall, Ned was greeted with gasps and murmurs from those gathered. Lords sworn to House Tully, knights, visiting bannermen. They saw Eddard Stark, rumored dead or imprisoned, standing in their midst, battered but unbroken. Edmure ordered a hearty meal, but Ned insisted on speaking first. He told them briefly of his arrest in King's Landing, Joffrey's cruelty, the last-minute twist that had allowed him to escape. He kept certain details vague to protect those who had helped him. But he made it clear that Joffrey intended to hold Sansa hostage, that the Lannisters were in ascendancy at court, and that the North needed to rally if they were to free her and restore order. Edmure's face hardened. "You'll have the Riverlands with you, brother. The Lannisters have burned our fields, terrorized our small folk. We've reason enough to fight." A tall man with silver-streaked hair, Lord Jason Mallister, Ned presumed, stepped forward. "The young wolf is already on the march, last we heard. He'll want to meet you, Lord Stark." Ned nodded, wiping sweat from his brow. "Yes, if I can stand beside my son, if I can bring the North in full force, perhaps we can free my daughter." Edmure clasped Ned's hand. "We'll see it done." At that moment, one of the maesters approached, bowing. "Forgive me, my lords. There was a raven just this morning from Moat Cailin. Lady Caitlyn travels with your son, Lord Stark. She hopes to treat with Walder Frey for passage across the twins." Ned's heart skipped. He remembered Lord Walder Frey's reputation, cunning, easily slighted, more concerned with self-interest than honor. The crossing at the twins was essential if Robb's host was to move swiftly south. He hoped Walder Frey would not hamper them or demand too steep a price. "We must ride out to join them," Ned said. "The sooner, the better." Edmure furrowed his brow. "The Lannister host lies to the southeast. Another force under Jaime Lannister has battered the surrounding towns. We'll need to move with caution." "We will," Ned said, voice grim. "But time is not our ally." It took another 2 days of preparation before they could muster a suitable escort for Ned. Lord Mallister pledged a contingent of knights and archers. Edmure, anxious to protect Riverrun, opted to remain behind to coordinate defenses with the Blackfish. But he gave Ned swift horses, provisions, and a cadre of men-at-arms. Ned's plan was to ride north, hopefully link with Robb's forces at the Twins, and from there decide on the best strategy to confront the Lannisters and to rescue Sansa. On the morning he departed, the castle court saw him off with a mixture of hope and solemnity. The winter sun was pale. Ned wore sturdy leather armor now, freshly fitted, a sword at his side. He felt more like himself than he had since leaving Winterfell. Each breath of crisp air steadied him. Lord Mallister extended his hand. "I ride with you, my lord. We'll see you safely to your son." Ned gripped his hand firmly. "My thanks." With that, they set out. The men carried Tully banners alongside Mallister ones, though for stealth they kept them furled when traveling beyond sight of Riverrun's walls. They moved at a brisk pace, skirting the main roads whenever possible. Scouts rode ahead, scanning for any sign of the Lannister host. Every step north felt like another step toward redemption in Ned's mind. He had lost so much, made so many mistakes, trusting Littlefinger, underestimating Cersei, attempting to do the honorable thing without preparing for the ruthlessness around him. But he was still alive, and so long as he lived, he would fight to protect his children and uphold the honor of his house. They crossed the Red Fork, forging onward across rolling plains. Now and then they encountered ragged small folk fleeing Lannister raids or burned farmsteads, black smoke curling in the distance. Ned's jaw clenched at the devastation. War was cruelty, no matter the cause. He vowed silently that if he had any say, there would be justice for these outrages. On the 6th day of riding, they approached a bend in the Green Fork near the Twins. Scouts returned, breathless. "We've sighted the northern host," they reported. They're camped outside the Twins, seeking safe passage across Lord Walder's bridge. Ned let out a sigh of relief. At last, he would see Robb. He had heard the rumors, how quickly the northern banners had answered. The young wolf was said to lead an army of fierce soldiers determined to free Ned and avenge any harm to their liege lord's family. Now that Ned was free, the dynamic would shift. But he wondered if Robb had already begun negotiations with Lord Walder, and at what cost. They rode on, crossing farmland until the great towers of the Twins came into view, two squat, ugly stone keeps flanking the crossing over the Green Fork with a massive bridge spanning the water. Arrayed on the southern side was a sea of tents, the banners of various northern houses flapping in the wind. Ned's throat tightened at the sight of the dire wolf of Stark, the sunburst of Karstark, the tall pine of the Glovers, the merman of Manderley, all united. A wave of fierce pride swept through him. As they neared the encampment, men shouted challenges, but when Ned drew closer, the cry went up, "Lord Stark? Lord Eddard Stark." Confusion rippled through the lines, then an incredulous roar of excitement. Northern soldiers rushed forward, eager to see the lord they believed lost. Ned was overwhelmed by their cheering and the swirl of emotion. And then he saw him, Robb Stark, astride a great grey dire wolf banner, flanked by Theon Greyjoy and Great Jon Umber. Robb's face was a mixture of astonishment, relief, and tears. He spurred his horse forward, practically leaping from the saddle to embrace Ned, nearly toppling them both. "Father." Robb's voice was thick with emotion. "I thought they'd killed you. By the gods, we all thought you were lost." Ned clasped Robb tightly, hardly believing how tall and broad his boy had grown in so short a time. "I live, son," he said, voice trembling. "And we'll save Sansa." Robb pulled back, tears in his eyes. "Aye, we will." The men were ready to storm the gates of King's Landing if we had to. Mother will be overjoyed to see you." As if summoned, Lady Catelyn appeared, dismounting from her own horse. Her cheeks were already wet with tears. She ran to Ned's side, her face alight with relief and heartbreak. Ned took her in his arms. For a long moment, words failed. They simply held each other, the weight of fear and longing giving way to the certainty of this reunion. At last, Catelyn drew back, brushing tears aside. "We have so much to speak of," she whispered, a trembling smile on her lips. "But I thank the gods for your return. Sansa, Arya," her voice broke. Ned nodded, clasping her hands. "I know. Sansa is hostage. Arya escaped the city with help, though I'm not entirely certain where she is. We must be cautious, Cat, but I will not rest until we bring Sansa home." "She will come home," Catelyn said fiercely, her grief and anger plain. "We have an army behind us and the Riverlands are with us. Walder Frey has just agreed to let us cross that a price." Ned's gaze sharpened. He knew the cunning nature of the man. "What price?" Robb's expression turned somber. "I'm to wed one of his daughters or granddaughters once the war is done. Also, Arya is to be betrothed to another one. Terms that we have little choice but to accept if we wanted to cross swiftly." Ned squeezed his eyes shut. Arya would be furious, but if it was the cost of saving Sansa and preserving the North, so be it. "We'll manage," he said at last. "We mustn't linger. Tywin Lannister marches. Jaime Lannister ravages the Riverlands. Joffrey sits the throne, ever more dangerous." A solemn hush fell over the gathered lords. Then the great Jon boomed, "But we have our liege lord returned to us." He raised his sword. "For Stark and Winterfell." A cheer went up, brimming with renewed confidence. Ned felt humbled by their loyalty and determined to be worthy of it. He met Catelyn's gaze, then Robb's. "We cross at once," he said. "We'll face the Lannisters with the combined might of the North and the Riverlands. We'll force them to yield my daughter, or we'll break them." That evening, in a hastily convened war council, Ned laid out what he knew of King's Landing, Joffrey's temperament, the Lannisters' hold on the capital, the small council divided among themselves. Varys had presumably kept certain factions in place, but how stable were they? If the city turned on Joffrey, might they force a negotiated settlement? The lords debated the best course. Some argued they should march straight to the heart of the realm, smash the Lannisters in open battle, and lay siege to King's Landing. Others favored confronting Tywin's forces in the field first. Robb listened to his father closely but made his own points, surprising Ned with his composure and leadership. Catelyn contributed strategic suggestions about dealing with Walder Frey. The Riverlords weighed in, citing the devastation already wrought by the Lannisters. In the end, they resolved to cross the twins immediately, link up with additional forces from the Vale if possible, though Lady Lysa Arryn's cooperation was uncertain, and attempt to draw Tywin Lannister into a pitched battle on ground of their choosing. If they could defeat Tywin or Jaime decisively, King's Landing might be forced to parley. Before dawn, Ned found himself crossing that narrow, fortified bridge that stretched between the twins. Walder Frey himself stood at the far tower to watch, a host of his brood behind him, all with the famous pointed look of the phrase. Ned did not relish a conversation with the old man, but he bowed curtly as they passed, murmuring the necessary pleasantries. Walder grinned a toothless smile, ignoring the hostility etched on Robb's face. On the northern bank, the combined forces marched in tight columns, thousands strong, banners streaming. Ned rode near Robb, Catelyn, and the Grey John. Grey Wind padded alongside, Robb's dire wolf, a silent and fearsome presence. Ned felt a surge of pride at seeing the dire wolf sigil wave above such a formidable army. The men recognized Ned, the rightful lord of Winterfell, and at times they roared his name. Yet Ned's mind was never at peace. Always he thought of Sansa trapped in the Red Keep, alone among enemies. He thought of Arya, hopefully safe but unaccounted for. He feared Joffrey's madness. If news of Ned's survival and the North's mobilization reached him, might the Boy King lash out at Sansa? That fear gnawed at Ned's gut day and night. But if they moved swiftly and struck hard, they might free her before their cruelty found its mark. Ravens flew each morning, carrying messages of alliance or warning. Ned wrote to Stannis and Renly Baratheon, both uncertain which brother of the late King Robert would stake the better claim, but urging them to consider the Lannister threat. He wrote to the north, assuring them of his survival and calling for every man who could bear arms to reinforce Robb's host. He told them of the injustice done to House Stark, the captivity of Lady Sansa, the betrayal in King's Landing. Let the realm know the truth. On the 12th day since crossing the twins, scouts brought word that Jaime Lannister had laid siege to Riverrun but had withdrawn partially, anticipating the northern approach. Tywin Lannister was regrouping somewhere to the south. The camp buzzed with excitement and opportunity to catch Jaime unprepared. Ned, Robb, and their captains conferred. They decided on a pincer movement. Part of the host would feign a crossing of the Red Fork upstream, drawing Jaime's attention, while Ned and Robb took the main army around to strike from another direction. It was bold and dangerous, but if executed well, they could crush the Lannister forces near Riverrun. Battle came at dawn. The Lannister scouts, fooled by the northern ruse, positioned their lines in haste. The Grey John led his contingent in a fierce charge that pinned the Lannisters at the center. Then Ned, Robb, and the bulk of the forces emerged from the thick morning mist on the Lannisters' flank. Horns sounded. Horses thundered across the field. Ned rode amid the swirl of dust and chaos, his heart pounding with grim resolve. This was the path to rescuing Sansa, to forcing the Lannisters to the table. He led the charge, sword flashing in the early light, cutting through the chaos. He had fought at the Trident beside Robert Baratheon long ago, had faced the rebellion's battles. But that felt like a lifetime past. Now he fought for his children's future. Jaime Lannister's men, though seasoned, were caught off guard. The wave of northern steel crashed into them. Grey Wind leaped among the lines, snapping and snarling. The northern banner men roared, spurred by the knowledge that their lord was alive and fighting by their side. Ned hacked at a knight's shield, denting it, then pivoted, blocking a blow aimed at his back. Blood spattered the grass. War cries and screams blended into a deafening cacophony. He spotted Jaime Lannister's golden hair gleaming in the fray, the Kingslayer rallying his knights. Ned steeled himself. He had no love for the man who tossed Bran from a tower, who served the vile Joffrey. But Jaime fought well, as always, slashing through two northern foemen, parrying a halberd with uncanny speed. The man was skill incarnate, a deadly dancer with a blade. Robb spurred his horse toward Jaime, but Ned, seeing the danger, flanked his son, determined they would face the Kingslayer together if it came to it. The battle's lines were swirling. The Greyjohn's contingent pressed the center, the Lannister ranks wavered, but Jaime and his knights formed a stubborn knot. That knot was retreating, though, edged back by the northern momentum. Ned seized the chance. Secure their standard, Ned roared, pointing to the Lannister lion banner. If they could capture or slay the banner carriers, morale might break. A group of Karstark riders surged forward, clashing with the Lannister banner guard. Steel rang on steel. Suddenly, Jaime was there, silver armor gleaming with blood and dirt, a snarl on his lips. He thrust aside a Karstark knight, whirled to face Ned. Their eyes locked. So the traitor escapes death, only to chase it again, Jaime spat, mocking even in the midst of battle. His sword hissed up. Ned gritted his teeth. I am no traitor. The true traitors are those who serve a bastard king. Jaime sneered. You spout that nonsense again, Stark. You do love your honor. With that he lunged. Their blades met in a harsh clang. Ned felt the vibration jolt up his arms. Jaime was strong, fast. But Ned was no novice. The memories of war were etched into his bones. He pivoted, letting Jaime's momentum carry him a step too far. He struck back, but Jaime recovered swiftly, parrying with a speed that seemed almost effortless. Around them battle raged. Horses screamed. Men fell. But in this moment Ned had only Jaime's blade to worry about. The Kingslayer was cunning, darting in with feints, forcing Ned to shift his guard. Ned maintained a steady center, deflecting each blow, waiting for Jaime to expose himself. Robb circled nearby, fending off two Lannister knights, trying to come to his father's aid. But Ned called out, No, Robb. Take the field. Secure their flank. He could not risk his son being overwhelmed by Jaime's lethal skill. Jaime smirked. Touching. You want the boy to see you die alone. Another lunge. Ned dodged, twisting his hips. Jaime's sword grazed Ned's leather armor. The sting raked Ned's ribs. He hissed in pain. He answered with a slash aimed at Jaime's shoulder. Jaime blocked at the last second, the force sending him back a step. Ned pursued, adrenaline surging. For an instant, Jaime's footing faltered on the bloody mud. Ned struck again, quick, angled. Jaime barely caught it, wincing as the clash jarred his arm. Their faces were inches apart, teeth bared. Then a wave of northern cavalry thundered by, scattering Lannister foemen. The press of battle separated Ned and Jaime. The Kingslayer was forced to yield ground, nearly unhorsed by the chaos swirling around him. He snarled at Ned, tried to hack his way back, but a group of Karstarks intervened. The lines collapsed. Lannister men began to break, fleeing for the safety of the river crossing. Jaime cursed. In a desperate attempt to rally, he hewed down a Karstark bannerman, bellowing commands. But the tide was too strong. Ned glimpsed him fighting valiantly, cutting down two more men. Then a volley of arrows rained in from the Mallister archers. Jaime's horse reared, struck by an arrow. The last Ned saw was Jaime being pulled away by a group of his knights, leaving the field in disarray. The Lannisters sounded the retreat. Within the hour, the field was littered with dead and dying, and the northern host held the ground. Cheers rose as the lion banner was taken, cast down in the blood-soaked mud. Ned's side bled from the slash, and exhaustion crushed him, but he managed a nod of satisfaction. The Lannisters had been repulsed. Riverrun was safe for now. That evening they tended the wounded. Ned supervised as best he could, praising those who fought bravely. The cost had been high, as all battles are. He walked among the injured men, offering words of comfort. He had not led them into war lightly, but necessity drove them. He would not abandon them in their hour of suffering. When he finally returned to the command tent, Robb and Catelyn awaited him, relief etched on their faces. You're wounded, Catelyn said softly, checking the cut at his side. The maester stepped forward to tend him. I'll live, Ned murmured, gritting his teeth as the salve burned. But Sansa still needs us. Now that we've broken Jaime's hold here, we might march south. Robb nodded, though he looked weary. We have momentum. Tywin might come from the south to support Joffrey. We'll need to move fast. Catelyn squeezed Ned's hand. We should also consider the possibility of negotiating a hostage exchange. If we capture Jaime. We have not, Ned reminded her, voice grim. He fled. Still, if we can corner him eventually, we may exchange him for Sansa. They all knew the next battles would be even more dangerous. King's Landing itself might be the final confrontation. But Ned saw a glimmer of hope in his son's eyes and in Catelyn's fierce determination. Word spread throughout the camp of the victory that Eddard Stark had returned from death's door to lead them. Morale soared. War horns sounded at dawn and the battered host marched on. The sun rose behind them, casting long shadows across the fields. Sansa's life hung in the balance, but they carried forward, hearts burning with resolve to see her freed, to see justice done. Days turned into weeks as they maneuvered across the Riverlands, pushing deeper south, engaging scattered Lannister forces in smaller skirmishes. Each time, the northern host prevailed, though at growing cost. Finally, word reached them that Tywin Lannister was massing near Harrenhal, a fortress that cast a terrible silhouette against the sky. If the Northern army could defeat Tywin there, King's Landing would lie vulnerable. Ned, Robb, and their commanders debated the wisdom of an assault on Harrenhal, an enormous stronghold steeped in a reputation of curses and ill omen. But time was short. Sansa had been a prisoner for too long already. Ned carried the guilt daily, fueling his drive. Meanwhile, ravens brought news of the capital. Joffrey had grown even more erratic, punishing anyone suspected of disloyalty. The small council was in disarray. Cersei tried to maintain order, but the Boy King refused counsel. Riots broke out in Flea Bottom over food shortages. Some said the city teetered on the brink of revolt. A letter bearing Varys's cryptic signature arrived one night, hinting that Sansa was still alive but in grave danger. That time grew short. Resolved, Ned pressed forward. They reached the outskirts of Harrenhal by nightfall on a moonless evening. Scouts crept close, reporting that Tywin's force was indeed large but divided. Some men guarded the fords around the castle, others patrolled. If they could strike quickly, they might force Tywin into open battle or cut off his supplies. The plan was risky. Ned stood outside his tent, gazing at the flickering torches on Harrenhal's massive towers. The walls loomed, black stone under the starless sky. Catelyn approached, resting a hand on his arm. Her eyes shone with worry and determination. "We'll save her," she said, softly but firmly. Ned turned to face her. "I swear it," he whispered. "If I have to tear down those walls, if I have to face Tywin himself, I will see our daughter safe." They both knew the cost of such vows. But neither wavered. War drums rumbled in the distance. Dawn would bring the next step in this bloody dance. Ned closed his eyes, summoning the faces of his children, Sansa's bright smile, Arya's fierce scowl, Bran's curiosity, Little Rickon's laughter, Robb's ear, Nest eyes, and Jon's brooding warmth. They were his hope, his reason. He did not know if the gods were watching or if the old gods of the north could hear him here, so far from home. But he prayed all the same. And as the night stretched on, he felt that faint spark of hope kindle in his heart. He was alive, he was free, and though war raged, though the realm shook beneath the onslaught of ambition and cruelty, Ned Stark had not yielded. He would fight on, for the sake of every life that depended on his honor, for the promise he'd made to his daughter, for the family he loved beyond measure. So with dawn's first light, they would ride anew, forging a path through blood and iron. The road ahead was perilous, yet in his mind he could already picture Sansa rescued, reunited under the Stark banner, the Lannisters' hold on the throne shattered by truth or by sword. And if fate was kind, though Ned Stark had learned not to put too much trust in kindness, the realm might see a day when Winterfell's halls rang again with laughter, and the pack was home, safe from the storms of war. He felt an odd calm settle over him as he stood there in the pre-dawn gloom. It was the calm of purpose, of a man resolved to do what must be done. The next chapters of this conflict would be brutal, uncertain, but he would see them through. Eddard Stark had escaped King's Landing alive, and for the realm and for his beloved children that might make all the difference. Eddard Stark stood beneath the gathering dawn light, a faint hush lingering over the ranks of his army. The men were stirring from their tents, some clasping helmets under their arms, others adjusting the straps of mail that clung to them like a second skin. Horses snorted in the early chill. Hoarfrost clung to the grass and brambles, turning the campsite into a ghostly gray. In the faint gloom, Harrenhal's enormous silhouette rose like a monstrous shadow against the sky. Even from this distance, Ned could see the broken towers, the melted stone where dragonfire had once rained down in the days of Aegon the Conqueror. Despite the centuries, Harrenhal remained an ominous presence, its walls nearly unassailable, its courtyard vast enough to hold an entire army. And now, within those walls or near enough to them, Tywin Lannister marshaled his forces. Ned drew a measured breath and closed his eyes. He recalled the last time he had seen Harrenhal decades ago during the great tourney where Prince Rhaegar had crowned Lyanna Stark Queen of Love and Beauty. That felt like a dream from another life, an echo of youth when the realm had been on the cusp of the rebellion that would change everything. Now he returned under far darker circumstances with a host of Northmen and river lords at his back and the threat of war thick in the air. If Tywin Lannister was determined to break the Riverlands or to crush the North, Harrenhal would be his bastion. And if the North wished to bring Sansa home, if Ned wished to keep his family safe, he would have to brave its accursed walls or lure Tywin's men out into open battle. He heard footfalls behind him in the half-dark and turned to see Robb approaching. His son's face, once so boyish, bore the hard lines of command. There were remnants of youth in Robb's expression, especially in the earnest way he carried himself, but the pressure of leading an entire army into war had aged him swiftly. To see that look in his boy's eyes pained Ned, but he recognized there was no avoiding the responsibilities that had fallen upon Rob's shoulders. "Father," Rob said, voice low so as not to wake the entire encampment with urgent talk. The scouts reported back just before dawn. Tywin's host spreads across the western fields below Harrenhal's walls. They believe he's called more banners from the Westerlands. "We'll face a larger force if we give him time." Ned rested a hand on the pommel of his sword. After the last battle, he had taken the sword of a slain Lannister knight, a plain but well-crafted blade, and he had grown accustomed to it. Yet he could not help but long for ice, the ancient Valyrian steel of House Stark. The Lannisters had seized ice in King's Landing, and that loss felt more personal than a mere stolen weapon. Still, the sword at his side was lethal enough in his hands. "We cannot let Tywin gather all his banners unopposed," he murmured, eyeing the dim outlines of the fortress. "But Harrenhal is as infamous for its impregnability as for the curses that haunt it. A siege there could last for months. Meanwhile, Sansa's fate hangs in the balance." Rob nodded solemnly. "Our men are restless too. They've marched long and fought hard. They want a decisive blow, and they're confident after our victory against Jaime's forces at the Red Fork. But Tywin is a cunning commander. He'll exploit any mistake." Ned thought of how close that last victory had been, how the Lannisters had retreated in good order, how Jaime had nearly broken free with more men than he'd lost. The so-called Kingslayer had proven elusive, a threat that hovered on the edge of every strategy. "We cannot rush headlong into a trap," Ned said. "At the same time, we must not hand Tywin the advantage. I want to speak with the Great John, Lord Karstark, Roose Bolton, and the other commanders. We need a plan to either draw Tywin out or slip around him entirely. If he's pinned here, have his men inside Harrenhal's walls and half spread across the fields, perhaps we can sever his lines of supply and starve him out." Rob's brows furrowed. "You mean cut him off from the gold mines of the Westerlands? That would take time." Time, Ned thought, was precisely the problem. If we spend too long wringing Harrenhal like a limp cloth, King's Landing will have ample warning and could move against our flank. Worse yet, Joffrey might harm Sansa out of spite. We need to consider another approach. Perhaps an infiltration, spies or scouts disguised as peasants to slip within Harrenhal's gates. Rob gave him a tight smile. "We have a few men skilled at such work, but none who could outfox Tywin and the entire Lannister guard if they're on high alert." "I know, but we have to explore every possibility." Ned exhaled. "Let's wake the captains. Summon them for council. I'll speak with our allies from the Riverlands, see if they know of hidden ways in or out. In the meantime, double the watch. If Tywin decides to ride out and meet us, we want warning." They parted ways. Ned took a moment to gaze at the creeping sunrise. The horizon blurred with tendrils of mist, and the murmur of men rousing filled the camp. He was reminded of the rebellion's mornings, of him and Robert Baratheon on the cusp of battle, joking grimly about the odds, steel in their hands. This time, though, Robert was dead and Ned was left to fight not only for the North but for the life of his daughter. He silently renewed his prayer for the old gods to guide him, even if the godwood at Winterfell was countless leagues away. He passed among the rows of tents, nodding to men as they awakened to stoke cook fires, as they polished swords or rubbed down anxious horses. Some paused to salute. Others eyed him with a mixture of awe and relief. Lord Eddard Stark, whom they believed either executed or imprisoned, stood among them with steady resolve. Many offered a few words of greeting or exclaimed how good it was to see their liege lord leading them. Ned responded gently, never lingering too long, maintaining the calm confidence they needed to see in their commander. In a large tent near the center of the encampment, a rudimentary table had been set with a crude map of the area around Harrenhal. Catelyn was already there, conferring with the Great John and several northern lords. She wore a cloak of thick gray wool against the chill. Despite the lines of worry in her face, she exuded a quiet ferocity and intelligence that commanded respect among the gathered men. Seeing her so steadfast lifted Ned's heart, but he also worried that they were both too close to the front lines. If fate turned cruel, the Stark children would lose not only one parent but both. Yet he knew Catelyn would never accept being sent away from the seat of war while her daughter's fates hung precariously in the balance. The Great John, a hulking figure with a booming voice, grinned at Ned. "My lord, these Lannisters cower behind walls of melted stone. A sad sight. I say we knock on Harrenhal's gates until Tywin has no choice but to come out and dance. The North does not fear curses." Roose Bolton, pale and soft-spoken, stood off to the side, his voice quiet but piercing. "That fortress is no ordinary castle, Great John. A direct assault would leave half our men dead, perhaps more. and Tywin's men would sally forth at their leisure, picking us off with archers and cavalry. We'd have to starve them out, but that might take half a year, and we haven't half a year to spare if Lady Sansa is threatened. Lady Catelyn's eyes flicked to Ned. Harrenhal has 5 gargantuan towers, each capable of housing a small army. The walls are enormous, the gates thick. If they mean to hold it, they can hold it for some time indeed. Word from within suggests Tywin has stockpiled grain and supplies. We cannot rely on a swift starvation. Ned nodded, scanning the map. What if we use a 2-pronged strategy? Split our forces? One half under Robb's command might remain here, applying pressure and preventing Tywin's expansion. The other half, led by me, could slip around Harrenhal's perimeter, traveling by less obvious routes, and aim for the King's Road. If Tywin hears we're making for King's Landing, he might be forced to abandon Harrenhal and race to defend the throne. That would leave the fortress behind him, or force him to stretch his lines so thin that we could defeat him in the open. Roose Bolton's expression turned thoughtful. But if we split our forces, we risk being beaten in detail. Tywin might decide to crush one smaller army before turning to the other. True, Ned allowed, but we outnumber the Lannisters slightly if our scouts speak true. They've suffered losses in the Riverlands, and we have additional outriders from the Tully domain. If Tywin emerges to confront me, Robb can join from the rear or cut off their retreat. If he stays within Harrenhal, I can press onward toward the capital. Catelyn spoke calmly. And what if we do take the King's Road and arrive at King's Landing? Even if Tywin is pinned here, there's still Jaime's forces unaccounted for, and the city watch might stand against us. The moment Joffrey realizes you still live, he may try to use Sansa as a bargaining chip or worse. We might not march all the way to the city gates, Ned said. Instead, we could threaten to do so unless they release Sansa. If it appears the entire northern host is bearing down on them, panic in King's Landing might ensue. The small council could turn on Joffrey if they see no chance of victory. The great Jon barked a laugh. I like it. Put the fear of the old gods in that whelp on the Iron Throne, watch him squeal. Bolton pressed his lips together, gaze distant. That could work, especially if we maintain illusions. Spread rumors that our entire army has left Harrenhal behind. Tywin might not immediately guess we've split forces. Robb entered, overhearing the last part. He waited until the lords dipped their heads in acknowledgement of his rank, then cleared his throat. Ser Stevern Fry has arrived from the Twins with some fresh reports. He says Lord Tywin's outriders are active near the Blackwater Rush, possibly to protect the roads leading into the Crownlands. It sounds like Tywin is indeed worried about an attack on King's Landing. That suits us, Ned said, tapping his finger on the map. We can use that worry to force his hand. If he believes we're about to bypass Harrenhal and strike for the city, he may feel compelled to move. Lord Karstark, face grim from the loss of 2 sons in earlier skirmishes, nodded stiffly. Tywin Lannister is too proud to let you steal a march on King's Landing. His precious grandson needs all the help he can muster. Yes, Ned said. I propose we begin preparations immediately. I'll take half the host, our cavalry in particular. Swiftness is key. Robb, you remain here with the rest, keep Tywin pinned. I'll make it known that I intend to ride for the Crownlands. Let the scouts spread rumors of it. That should draw Tywin out. When he moves, you harass his rear, force him into a conflict on 2 fronts. With luck, we can smash his army in the field. Robb studied his father's face. The lines of worry stood out clearly on the young man's brow, but he nodded. I'll do as you command. But, father, be careful. The Lannisters are cunning. If you fall into their hands again. Ned placed a firm hand on Robb's shoulder. That won't happen. And if it does, I'll fight to the last breath before letting them threaten the Starks again. A silence fell, laden with unspoken fears. At length, Lady Catelyn said, You should take me with you, Ned. But Ned shook his head gently. I need you here. One of us should remain to coordinate with Robb. If both of us vanish, the men might think we're deserting them. Besides, if we both left and Tywin somehow attacked this camp with cunning or forced a battle, our boy would have no counsel. You are his mother, your advice will be invaluable. She started to protest, but Robb's soft, mother, please stayed her. She looked between them, torn, and finally gave a slight nod of acquiescence. Ned saw the grief in her eyes. She had nearly lost him once in King's Landing. Parting again must be agony. He squeezed her hand, wishing there was another way. By midday, the camp was alive with the bustle of reorganization. Ned's portion of the army, heavy cavalry, some mounted archers, and a few 1,000-foot soldiers began breaking down tents, rolling up the banners to avoid telegraphing their movements too soon. Meanwhile, Robb and Lady Catelyn consulted with the Great Jon and the other lords who would remain. The notion was to make the encampment appear large but immobile, reinforcing the illusion that the entire army was still massed while Ned's force slipped away. The ground was churned to mud by hooves and boots as they prepared to depart. Ned donned his mail, tested the tightness of the straps, and pulled on thick leather gauntlets. The new sword he carried was belted at his hip. He took a moment in his private tent to pen a short letter to Sansa, a letter he had no way of delivering but needed to write. In it, he assured her he was alive, that her family was coming for her, that she should remain strong. He ended the note with, "I love you, my little girl." Then he folded it carefully and tucked it into his shirt close to his heart, a silent promise that he would not rest until she was safe. At last, he stepped out, mounted the sturdy warhorse a Mallister knight had gifted him, and rode to where Robb and Catelyn stood under the banner of the direwolf. He leaned down to clasp Robb's forearm. "Lead well, my son. Listen to your mother's counsel. We will see each other soon, God's willing." Robb set his jaw, eyes brimming with unspoken emotion, but he inclined his head. "I will. Gods keep you safe, father." Then Ned turned to Catelyn. She reached up and he grasped her hand. "Bring her back," she whispered. "Bring our girl home, Ned." "I will." He wanted to say more, but emotion choked him. Instead, he nodded, gave her fingers a final squeeze, and kicked his horse forward. The cavalry lines moved out with a rumble of hooves, the foot soldiers marching behind in orderly columns to the subdued thunder of drums. Ned took one last look at the tall tents behind him, the partial silhouette of Harrenhal in the distance, then focused on the road ahead. War demanded swift decisions, and the realm's future depended on which way Tywin Lannister would jump. They made good time in the early days, forging a route that curved eastward, away from Harrenhal's direct vantage. Scouts fanned out to watch for enemy outriders. They encountered a few Lannister patrols on the second day, but these were small and easily evaded. Ned instructed his men to let them glimpse the bulk of the army's cavalry, ensuring they carried word back to Tywin that Eddard Stark was indeed leading a sizable force toward the Crownlands. On the fifth day, they reached the fringes of the Blackwater Rush, the same river Ned had fled by boat not so long ago. The memory of that desperate night returned to him, chains biting his wrists, the swirl of uncertain alliances in King's Landing. He was a man transformed now, no longer alone and half-dead, but leading thousands in a bid to rescue his daughter and bring the Lannisters to heel. At a temporary camp near the water's edge, Ned conferred with a group of mounted scouts who had just returned, dusty and breathless. Their captain, a rangy Northman with a scar down one cheek, bowed. "My lord, we spied small clusters of Lannister riders on the far side of the rush. They're trying to gauge our numbers. We saw signal fires at dusk. They likely know we are here in force." Ned nodded. "Good. Let them keep watchers. We want them to be certain of our presence, so they'll send word to Tywin." The captain smirked. "So we make noise, then?" "Yes. But don't get caught unawares. We still want to choose the battlefield, not stumble into a trap. Push them back if they come too close, but let them see enough of our lines to know we're serious." When the captain left, Ned spent some time with his officers plotting the next move. The plan hinged on Tywin's reaction at Harrenhal. If the Lannister lord believed he risked losing King's Landing, he might march out, leaving Harrenhal's gates behind him. Then Robb could sweep in, or at least block Tywin's retreat, forcing a pitched battle. Yet if Tywin guessed the ruse or chose to remain entrenched, Ned would be left in a precarious position, marching on King's Landing with half an army against the combined might of the Crown and the remainder of Lannister forces. Ned tried not to dwell on how tenuous it all was. War often hinged on guesswork and nerve. Each night, Ned wrote updates on scraps of parchment, sending ravens to Robb's position. He rarely received replies. Fewer ravens flew in return from that side, either because of Lannister interception or because Robb had little to report. It weighed on Ned's mind. He worried for his son, for Catelyn, for the men left behind. But pressing forward remained his only choice, and so he did. On the 9th day, as the morning broke in pale gold across the rolling hills, the scouts returned with electrifying news. Tywin Lannister was on the march. A large host was seen departing Harrenhal, headed southeast, presumably to intercept Ned's forces. The men in Ned's camp stirred at once, excitement and wariness clashing in their faces. This was the chance. If Tywin truly brought the bulk of his knights and foot from Harrenhal, then Robb might seize the fortress or at least harry any defenders left behind. More important, it meant Ned could potentially face Tywin in a decisive clash, one that might force negotiations for Sansa's freedom. He immediately convened his officers. "If Tywin's moving, we have to choose the ground. I want to lure him toward this valley here." He tapped the map where the rush turns north and the land grows marshy. Our cavalry can flank from the higher ridges and we might box in the Lannisters near the water. Let them think we're forging a direct route to King's Landing but pivot at the last moment. A cluster of grizzled knights and banner men studied the map, nodding. One of them, a middle-aged man from the north with a thick beard, said, "We can leave a screen of outriders to keep Tywin thinking we're heading further east. Then we swing our main body back west. If the ground is soggy, we'll have the advantage, especially if the Lannisters press too fast." Ned nodded. "Aye, but we must be mindful that Tywin may have outriders of his own. The success of this tactic relies on us surprising him. Make sure our men are ready to break camp quickly." They set the plan in motion. Word spread through the ranks, a battle was coming, a chance to deal the Lannisters a crippling blow. Morale ran high. Ned felt that old tension crawling up his spine, the knowledge that men would soon die on both sides, that the rivers and fields might again be stained red. Yet the alternative was to yield to the Lannisters and forfeit any hope of saving Sansa. Ned would not shrink from what had to be done. That evening, the camp was alive with subdued preparation. Horses were fed and brushed, swords were sharpened, men said quiet prayers to whichever gods they kept. Ned walked among them, offering a reassuring word or a steady hand. Some asked about Lady Sansa, how she fared, and Ned answered as calmly as he could that she yet lived, that they would free her from the Red Keep. He knew how crucial it was for the men to believe that every sacrifice had a purpose beyond mere vengeance. Alone in his tent, Ned found a moment to reflect. He thought of Sansa, remembering how she used to sing and dance in the halls of Winterfell, her voice sweet as birdsong. He thought of Arya, hoping she was safe somewhere on the road north or hidden among allies. He thought of his younger sons in Winterfell, likely hearing rumors of war and uncertain about the family's fate. It weighed on his heart like a stone. He touched the letter he had written to Sansa tucked against his chest and promised himself that soon he would not need to write letters. He would speak the words to her face to face. As dawn broke, Ned's force moved swiftly, leaving behind carefully scattered signs of a larger eastward march: trampled grass, false campfires, wagon ruts going nowhere. Meanwhile, the main body pivoted west, skirting the rush until they reached the targeted valley. The day was gray, clouds looming overhead as if the sky itself brooded over the violence soon to unfold. Scouts reported that Tywin's host would likely reach the valley by late afternoon. Ned positioned his men strategically, cavalry on the ridges overlooking the marshy ground near the water, archers on a small rise, foot soldiers massed just out of sight behind a bend. The trap was set. He stood on a slight hill with several captains, scanning the horizon. Before long, the distant glint of armor emerged over the rolling land, Lannister outriders, gold cloaks fluttering. Behind them, the columns of foot, the knights, the banners bearing the Golden Lion. The scope of Tywin's force was impressive, perhaps equal in size to Ned's. They advanced cautiously, uncertain of the North's position but eager to close the distance. A hush fell on Ned's men. A hush broken only by the soft snorts of horses, the rustle of armor, the low murmur of final preparations. Ned remembered Robert's rebellion, the battles that had shaped him. The same tension coiled now, making each breath feel measured and precious. He glanced at the men around him, grizzled veterans of the North, river lords with vengeance burning in their eyes, younger knights, all united under one cause. This was the difference from King's Landing, where he had been alone and betrayed. Now House Stark had come with an army. The wind shifted, carrying the faint sound of horns from the Lannister lines. Ned saw their banners spread, the columns aligning. Tywin was no fool. He had doubtless realized a trap was possible. His outriders fanned out to probe the ridges. Ned's archers waited on Ned's signal, bows drawn, hidden amid the brush. The northern cavalry remained still, horses stamping restlessly. They had to wait until Tywin committed. At length, the main body of Lannister troops pushed forward along the marshy ground near the river. Perhaps Tywin believed the North had continued east, or perhaps he expected to force them out by controlling the water. When enough of the Lannisters had waded into the soft terrain, Ned raised his arm. A horn blast echoed across the valley. The archers emerged, loosing a volley of arrows that arced high before falling among the exposed Lannisters. Screams ripped through the air. Confusion spread in their ranks as more arrows fell. The cavalry on the ridges thundered forward, barreling down the slopes with steel-tipped lances shining. Foot soldiers surged from their hiding place to block any retreat. The clash was thunderous. Ned led one cavalry charge, sword in hand, cutting through Lannister spearmen who flailed in the mire. Horses churned mud and water. Men shouted curses. Steel rang. Ned kept his wits about him, guiding his horse skillfully despite the uneven ground, striking only when he had a clear path. A Lannister bannerman raised a lion's standard, but Ned's men swept around him. A northern knight brought his mace down on the bannerman's helmet, sending him sprawling. The lion banner fell into the muck, splattered with mud and blood. Trumpets from the Lannister side sounded frantic notes, trying to regroup. Ned saw a mounted figure clad in rich plate, possibly Tywin himself or one of his commanders, trying to rally the knights. The Lannister cavalry advanced into the fray, but they found themselves funneled by the terrain, unable to deploy in wide formation. That was precisely what Ned had hoped for. Still, the Lannisters were formidable fighters, disciplined and well-armed. They began to form ranks in the center, pushing outward. Swords clashed with savage intensity, men falling on both sides. The water near the banks ran red. Ned glimpsed archers from the Lannister side returning fire, and several of his own men cried out as arrows found them. The battle threatened to devolve into a melee, so Ned signaled the second wave of his cavalry to circle behind the Lannisters. Horns sounded. More mounted Northmen crashed into the Lannister flank, breaking the shield wall. Ned guided his warhorse around a knot of struggling foes, spotting a cluster of gold-cloaked knights led by a hulking man with a lion-engraved helm. He recognized the large frame as Ser Gregor Clegane, the Mountain. A wave of revulsion coursed through Ned. Gregor was a monster rumored to have committed atrocities in the Riverlands, pillaging and murdering small folk. There he was, chopping down a Mallister knight with a brutal overhead swing that nearly split the man's torso. Blood sprayed. Gregor roared, turning to face another northerner. Ned urged his horse toward the beastly knight. His sword hand tensed with each gallop. Another wave of archers loosed from behind, but Gregor seemed impervious or simply too massive. Ned closed the distance, raising his sword. Gregor saw him coming and swung his own blade in a wide arc. Ned barely ducked in time, hearing the blade whistle past his head. He struck back, his sword smashing against Gregor's shoulder plate. Sparks flew, but the plate held. Gregor snarled and spurred his enormous warhorse sideways, trying to force Ned's mount off balance. For a moment, horse and horse slammed chest to chest. Gregor's warhorse was larger, heavier. Ned's mount whinnied in panic, but Ned held fast, gritting his teeth. He yanked the reins, pivoting so that Gregor's next blow glanced off Ned's shield. The force rattled Ned to the bone, but he stayed astride. He brought his sword up and thrust, aiming for the gap under Gregor's arm, but Gregor twisted, deflecting with his shield. The man's strength was monstrous. Even a glancing block nearly tore Ned's sword from his grip. They separated, circling in the melee. All around, men died or fought in frantic clusters. Ned's ears rang with the din. Gregor lunged again, his blade descending in a brutal hack. Ned parried, steel crashing, and the shock jolted his shoulders. He tried to counter, but Gregor hammered him with his shield, sending Ned reeling in the saddle. Pain flared in his side, where his ribs had been bruised before. Gasping, Ned yanked the reins, forcing his horse to sidestep before Gregor could finish him. A sudden swirl of motion behind Gregor, another northern knight rushed in, swinging a warhammer at the Mountain's back. Gregor whirled with inhuman speed, his sword biting into the knight's torso, hacking through mail. The knight coughed blood, sagging in the saddle. Gregor growled, yanked his sword free, and turned back to Ned. Ned clenched his jaw, remembering all the tales of Gregor's brutality, the murders he had inflicted upon Rhaegar's wife and children during the sack of King's Landing, the depredations he had unleashed on the Riverlands. A monster in service to the Lannisters. Ned refused to let fear stop him. If he could put an end to the Mountain here, it might save countless lives. Summoning all the resolve in his battered body, Ned spurred his horse forward, faking a slash at Gregor's left side. Gregor angled his shield. Ned changed direction at the last instant, thrusting under Gregor's right arm. The blade slid between armor plates, drawing a snarl from the giant. Gregor's elbow slammed down on Ned's weapon arm, nearly shattering the bone. Ned cried out, letting go of his sword, which stayed lodged in Gregor's side. The Mountain hissed in pain, staggering, but he still had his sword. Ned's horse stumbled sideways, and Ned barely kept from toppling. Desperate, he seized the reins and reached for his dagger. Gregor roared, preparing another killing blow. Suddenly, An arrow struck Gregor in the gap of his visor. He spasmed, helmet snapping back. Then another arrow, burying deep in his throat. His roar turned to a wet gurgle. Ned realized that a trio of northern archers, perched on a small rise, had loosed at just the right moment. Gregor reeled, dropping his sword as he clawed at the arrows. Blood spurted between his fingers. The giant knight tumbled from his saddle, hitting the mud with a tremendous splash. Ned stared, chest heaving. The mountain twitched once, then lay still, the shallow water lapping around his battered armor. A wave of relief mingled with horror at the carnage. But Ned had no time to dwell. Another cluster of Lannister men advanced, and he found himself in a swirl of fresh combat. He dismounted, knowing his exhausted horse wouldn't last much longer, and fought on foot, retrieving a spare sword from a fallen comrade. He led a group of Northmen to push further into the Lannister ranks. The mud clung to their boots, making every step a labor. Still, the tide seemed in their favor. The trap had been well laid, and the Lannisters were pressed on all sides. Some tried to surrender, dropping weapons and calling for mercy, while others fought on in a blind frenzy. Ned saw no sign of Tywin himself. Perhaps the cunning lion had hung back, watching. With the Lannisters' lines collapsing, Ned hoped they might capture Tywin and force an immediate exchange for Sansa. But as the sun descended into a haze of red, the remains of the Lannister host broke and fled. Their cavalry scattered westward, while foot soldiers tried to flee north or south into the marsh. Arrows rained among them as the north gave chase. When the battlefield finally fell quiet, the dying moaned among the churned mud and reeds. Ned stood drenched in sweat and blood, his breath coming in ragged bursts. His men gathered to him, battered but exultant. They had won a resounding victory. Lannister banners lay trampled in the muck. Gregor Clegane was dead, and hundreds of Lannister soldiers lay slain or captured. The night wind carried the stench of death. Some men exulted, while others knelt weeping over fallen friends. Ned's first act was to organize the search for the wounded. He insisted that all men who could still walk help carry the injured to a makeshift field hospital on higher ground. Captured Lannisters were disarmed and guarded. The knights carried torches, lighting the gloom. A few battered survivors claimed to be highborn or lesser lordlings. Ned demanded to know if Tywin Lannister was among the captured or dead, but no one had seen him. It seemed the old lion had evaded the trap, leaving many of his soldiers to their fate. Still, the victory was undeniable. As the hours stretched on, Ned's officers approached him, battered faces splitting with weary smiles. They hailed him with respect, proclaiming that Tywin's defeat would send shockwaves through the realm. Men predicted that the road to King's Landing now lay open, that Joffrey would tremble on his iron throne. Yet Ned's heart remained heavy with the cost, the lives spent, and the uncertainty of Sansa's status. Late that night, as the medics worked by torchlight, Ned found a moment to rest on a fallen log. He winced as a maester wrapped his bruised arm where Gregor had struck him. The day's adrenaline had worn off, leaving only pain and exhaustion. Yet even in that moment, he remembered the vow he had made to rescue his daughter. Each step felt like progress, but she was still out of his reach. The next morning, the battered host regrouped. They had taken many prisoners, and a few minor Lannister knights offered ransoms in exchange for their release. Ned refused to speak of ransoms until Sansa's safety was assured. He gathered intelligence from these knights, gleaning that Tywin had fled west with a few hundred loyal cavalry. Harrenhal might still be partially held, but with Tywin gone, it might also fall quickly to Robb's advantage. Ned dispatched ravens to Robb, describing the victory and urging him to seize Harrenhal if possible. He also sent letters to the River Lords calling them to push back any surviving Lannister garrisons. With Tywin's host in disarray, the path to King's Landing lay open. Ned debated whether to push onward immediately or to secure the region first. Ultimately, he decided to keep marching. The impetus was not a lust for conquest, but the urgency of saving Sansa and perhaps delivering a final blow that would end this war before it devoured more lives. They marched through lands once loyal to the Targaryens centuries before, passing charred ruins from Gregor Clegane's earlier raids. Small folk emerged from hiding, scrawny and afraid, only to cheer at the sight of Ned's banners once they realized these were Starks, the conquerors of the Lannister host. Ned had little time to address them, but he left behind food where he could spare it and posted small contingents to maintain order. The pace was grueling, each day a fresh trial for men and horses alike. Rain swept in, turning roads to mud. Supplies ran low, requiring foraging. Ned's arm throbbed, healing slowly from the bruising. Yet they pressed on. With each league gained, King's Landing loomed nearer. Joffrey's seat of power was a day or two's hard ride ahead, assuming the city still stood in the face of rumored unrest. Whispers reached Ned's ears of riots, of the city watch overworked, of lords at court bickering. None of this guaranteed Sansa's safety, but it might make the capital vulnerable. At last, on a stormy dusk, they arrived within sight of King's Landing. Across the Blackwater Bay, faint lights glimmered from the city's walls. Towers and spires rose like dark shapes against a bruised sky streaked with lightning. Ned called a halt, pitching camp in the relative cover of a grove of trees. Rain pattered on canvas tents. Thunder rumbled ominously as though the gods themselves watched with bated breath. Ned paced within his command tent, soaked cloak dripping on the ground as the officers gathered. The question before them, should they attempt an immediate assault or demand surrender? Joffrey had the advantage of the city walls, the Red Keep's defenses, and the gold cloaks. Yet the populace might not be entirely loyal, especially if rumors were true of hunger and violence within the city. Storming the city could lead to unimaginable slaughter, especially if the Lannisters used Sansa as a shield. Alternatively, a siege might starve the people, punishing the innocent and giving Joffrey time to respond. "We must see if there's a chance for a negotiated handover," Ned told his council. "I want no sack of King's Landing. The realm has bled enough." A few older lords exchanged wary glances, recalling how King's Landing had been brutally sacked at the end of Robert's rebellion. One northern lord said, "Joffrey is mad, by all accounts. He might refuse any terms." Ned nodded. "Very likely. But there are other players in the capital, Cersei, the small council, perhaps the city watch. If they see we have an overwhelming force, they might force Joffrey to surrender or might let us in if they believe it spares them from destruction. Our first demand will be that Sansa is delivered to us unharmed." The great Jon, who had joined Ned halfway through the march after handing off some responsibilities to Robb, clapped a hand on his sword hilt. "I let them quake behind their walls. We'll break them if they refuse." Ned's lips pressed tight. "If an assault is our last resort, so be it. But there are thousands of common folk in King's Landing who should not suffer for Joffrey's crimes." He turned to a maester near the map table. "Send a raven to the city gates demanding an audience or parley. State that I, Eddard Stark, Lord of Winterfell, come to reclaim my daughter and to seek redress for the crimes committed against my house and the Riverlands. Threaten that if Sansa is harmed, we will show no mercy. But temper it with a promise that if they yield her safely and open the gates, the city will be spared." His captains nodded. The maester scribbled furiously on parchment, blotting ink. Ned gazed at the flickering lantern light, imagining how the letter might strike fear or arrogance in Joffrey's heart. Would the Boy King respond with scorn, or would he yield? Cersei might try to preserve her power by bargaining or might lash out. So many unknowns. But Ned had to try. That night, the storm raged in earnest. Lightning flashed, illuminating the drenched tents and wagons. Ned lay awake on his cot, half expecting a stealth attack from the city. But the howling wind and rain seemed to keep the city watchmen pinned behind their walls. The next morning dawned gray and soaked. The roads were muddy streams. Ned's men drained water from tents, checked gear, prepared for the worst. By midday, a rider approached under a flag of truce. Ned met him at the edge of the encampment with a handful of mounted knights at his back. The rider, a gaunt man in the garb of the city watch, held out a sealed letter. "From Queen Regent Cersei Lannister," he announced. Ned took the letter, broke the wax seal, and read. The contents were short, formal, laced with the Queen's typical arrogance. "Lord Eddard Stark, we acknowledge your presence and your demands. Rest assured, your daughter remains unharmed. A meeting for parley may be arranged should you approach the city gates unarmed, accompanied by no more than 5 men. However, be warned that any attempt to threaten the king's life or forcibly seize the city will be met with righteous force. The king demands that you submit to his authority and face trial for treason. If you yield, he will show mercy to the north. If you refuse, your daughter's fate will be in your hands, not ours. Signed in the name of King Joffrey Baratheon. Queen Regent Cersei Lannister." Ned felt a cold fury building as he read. Submit for a so-called trial? Trust Joffrey's sense of mercy? The thought was absurd. He glanced at the messenger. "Is my daughter truly alive and—" "Well, she is, my lord," the messenger said carefully. "I cannot speak to her condition, but I have heard no ill rumor of her captivity." Ned's jaw tightened. He didn't trust Cersei or Joffrey an inch. But a parley might be the only chance to see Sansa, to confirm her safety, and possibly to arrange her release without a bloody assault. Inform the queen that I will come to the gates tomorrow at dawn with 5 men of my choosing, he said curtly. In exchange, I demand that Sansa be present. This parley serves no purpose if I cannot see for myself that she is unharmed. The messenger inclined his head, though a flicker of uncertainty crossed his features. I will relay your demand, my lord. May the gods grant a peaceful resolution. He turned his horse and rode off, water splashing under his hooves. Ned watched him go, mind churning. He returned to his tent, calling his officers to brief them. I will not go unprepared, he said. We must assume this could be a trap. I'll bring 5 men I trust implicitly. The Great John volunteered at once, but Ned shook his head. You're too valuable if things go ill. I need you commanding the men if I don't return. He looked around, selecting men skilled enough to defend him in close quarters but discreet enough to avoid alarming the Queen's retinue. He chose 4 knights from houses sworn to the Starks, men known for their loyalty and prowess. Then he turned to the final man, Jory Castle's cousin, Tomard Castle, a quiet, able fighter from Winterfell's guard. Tom, you'll accompany me. Tomard bowed deeply. I am honored, my lord. Catelyn, hearing of the plan, insisted on going as well. Ned refused. No. If it is a trap, they could capture us both, leaving Robb without father or mother. One must remain free to lead the North. Catelyn's face was stricken, but she nodded. Ned pressed her hands gently. Pray that tomorrow, we walk away with Sansa by our side. At dawn, Ned and his 5 companions rode out under a small white flag. The rest of the army stayed in readiness behind them. A hush seemed to blanket the lines of tents. The gates of King's Landing loomed ahead, tall and formidable. Guards manned the walls, crossbows visible. Smoke rose from the city, and Ned could almost smell the fear and desperation behind those walls. The common folk would know an army had come to challenge their king. At the main gate, a group of gold-cloaked guards stood waiting, their captain stepping forward. Open the gates for Lord Stark, he barked. The portcullis groaned, lifting just enough for Ned and his men to enter single file. They found themselves in the outer courtyard, ringed by city watch and a handful of mounted knights in crimson cloaks. Lannister men, no doubt. Tension crackled in the air. Ned spotted the Hound, Sandor Clegane, lurking with a hand on his sword hilt, watchful and dangerous. Nearby stood Peter Baelish, slimy smile flickering. And, of course, Cersei Lannister herself, clad in a green velvet gown, golden hair coiled elaborately atop her head. Beside her towered Ser Marentrant of the King's Guard, expression blank behind his helm. Ned's gaze swept the courtyard, heart-pounding. Where was Sansa? Cersei stepped forward, voice smooth. Lord Stark, you returned to the scene of your crimes. Have you come to bend the knee and beg forgiveness? We may yet find some mercy in our hearts. Ned did not dismount. Where's my daughter? I insisted she be present. Cersei arched an eyebrow. Patience. Bring the girl, she called to one of the guards. Moments later, Ned saw a slender figure led out from a side corridor, flanked by 2 gold cloaks. Sansa wore a plain gown, her red gold hair tangled. She looked pale, frightened, yet when her eyes fell on Ned, a tremor of hope lit her face. Father, she cried, stepping forward. One guard grabbed her arm, but she twisted free, stumbling a few steps. Ned nearly lost composure at the sight of her. He swung down from his horse, ignoring the suspicious looks of the Lannister knights. Sansa, he breathed, opening his arms. She ran to him, letting out a half-sob, half-cry as she clung to him. He stroked her hair gently, feeling how thin she'd become. Gods be good, you're alive, he murmured, his voice breaking. Her tears dampened his surcoat. Cersei cleared her throat. A charming reunion. But let us not forget the matter at hand. You stand accused of treason, my lord. You were supposed to confess, to take the black, yet you fled the city in disgrace. You have raised an army in rebellion against your rightful king. She gestured to Sansa. We have shown you a sign of our good faith by not harming your daughter. Now, will you reciprocate? Ned looked down at Sansa, who trembled in his arms. The city watch and Lannister knights stood ready. If he tried to flee with Sansa now, they would be cut down. He had come to parley, but Cersei was not to be trusted. Still, if they refused terms outright, Sansa might be dragged away again. He forced his tone to remain civil, though anger burned beneath. I come as the Lord of Winterfell with an army at the city gates. My demands are simple: release my daughter at once and relinquish your false claim that I am a traitor. Step down from the throne if you cannot demonstrate King Joffrey's rightful birth. We will hold a great council to determine who shall rule, or the realm will be plunged into further war. Cersei's eyes narrowed. King Joffrey is Robert's trueborn son. Your slander is treason. We owe you no courtesy, Peter Baelish cut in smoothly, but perhaps we can find a middle ground. Something that preserves peace. My queen, he bowed to Cersei, Lord Stark comes with thousands of men who might sack the city if forced. Must we risk all on pride? Cersei glared at him but said nothing. Baelish continued, turning to Ned, perhaps you could yield your army, disband it, and trust the queen's clemency. In return, Sansa might be allowed to return to you along with safe passage back to Winterfell. The king might be magnanimous. Ned's jaw set. I'll not disband an army that came to save my daughter and defend the North from Lannister aggression, especially not on empty promises. If you truly wish peace, surrender Sansa now as a show of good faith. Then we can discuss the terms. Cersei's lips curled. If we hand the girl to you so easily, what bargaining chip remains to guarantee your good behavior? You are the one who rebelled. Joffrey's clemency is the only reason you still live and the only reason your daughter draws breath. Sansa swallowed hard, staring up at her father with wide, desperate eyes. Ned brushed a tear from her cheek. He couldn't bear the thought of leaving her in Cersei's clutches a moment longer. Around him his knights tensed, ready to fight if necessary. But there were crossbows on the walls, gold cloaks fanned out, and Sansa remained so close to the Lannister line. One wrong move could see her seized or killed before Ned drew a single breath. A hush fell as thunder grumbled in the distance, echoing off the city walls. It seemed the storm had followed them here, an omen of the battle of wills now unfolding. Cersei allowed the silence to stretch, letting Ned feel the weight of the moment. At last, Ned spoke in a measured tone. You seem confident, yet an army stands outside these walls. The City Watch cannot hold King's Landing against a determined assault for long, not when half the population starves. Even if you cut down my daughter and me both, you will face the North's fury. Sansa clung to Ned's arm. Please, let me go with my father, she pleaded, voice quavering as she addressed the queen. I beg you, I've done no wrong. I only want to see my family safe. Cersei's mouth tightened. For a brief moment, Ned thought he saw genuine regret or sympathy flicker in her eyes. But then her face hardened. You stand accused of treason, Sansa Stark, by virtue of your father's crimes. Yet I am no monster, no matter what your father believes. I will consider releasing you if and when Lord Eddard Stark proves his loyalty by disbanding his forces and bending the knee to King Joffrey. Ned felt rage coil like a serpent in his gut. I bend no knee to false kings, he said softly. But I will propose a compromise, allow Sansa to ride out with me. In return, I will not storm the city. Instead, we will petition the rest of the realm, Stannis, Renly, the Vale, Dorne, for a great council to settle the matter of succession. If your king is indeed rightful, the council will confirm him. If not, he must yield. Cersei scoffed. Stannis? Renly? You think they will champion you? They might just as easily claim the throne for themselves. You invite more chaos. Baelish's voice slipped in again, calm and persuasive. Your grace, perhaps it is wise to avoid a siege. Think of the devastation the realm suffered under the sack of King's Landing. Do we wish a repeat? Ser Meryn Trant, silent until now, spoke. The king does not fear the likes of Ned Stark, he said in a cold monotone. But he might show mercy if you beg for it. Ned ignored him. His focus was on Cersei, for she held the real power behind Joffrey's empty crown. She looked torn between anger and caution, eyes flicking to the distant city walls as though she could see Ned's army beyond them. Finally, she said, your proposal is foolish, but I will consider a partial measure. If you will withdraw your army a day's march from the city to demonstrate your sincerity, I will allow you to see your daughter under supervised conditions, ensuring her continued safety. That is all I offer at this time. Sansa's grip on Ned's arm tightened. Please, father, she whispered. Don't leave me again. Ned's stomach twisted painfully. If he walked away without her, he'd be leaving her in danger. But if he pressed for more, the queen might end the parley and drag Sansa back inside, perhaps to harm her or use her as a hostage. There was no good choice. He swallowed, forcing composure. I need assurances that Sansa will remain unharmed, he said at last. She must be treated as a guest, not a prisoner. Cersei raised her chin. Very well. She shall have her own chambers and a retinue befitting a noble hostage, provided you move your army back. We will speak again in 3 days' time, perhaps at the same hour. If your men remain at the gates, the girl returns to her cell. A raw ache spread through Ned's chest. 3 days. Anything could happen. Yet storming the gates now would guarantee violence and risk Sansa's immediate death. The logic of war demanded he avoid that. We will withdraw, he said heavily, but not far. A day's march is too great. I will move my men 2 leagues to the north. That is my final compromise. Cersei made a show of considering. Then she gave a curt nod. 2 leagues, then? You shall have your precious visits with the girl every 3rd day as long as you keep your men at that distance. Ned forced himself to release Sansa. She clung desperately, tears brimming. Father, please, she said again, voice cracking. Don't leave me. The torment of letting her go again was nearly unbearable. Ned cupped her face in his hands, meeting her frightened blue eyes. I will not abandon you, little one. I swear it. I must do this to keep you safe for now. But trust me, we will be together soon. He kissed her brow, ignoring the pitying or mocking stares of the courtiers. Then he gently placed her in the custody of the gold cloak who stood waiting. Harm a hair on her head, Ned growled at the man, and I swear no castle or hideaway in the 7 kingdoms will save you. The guard swallowed, nodding stiffly. He might have worn Lannister colors, but no man wanted the wrath of the entire North upon him. Sansa was led away, her face streaked with tears, gazing back at Ned until the courtyard arch took her from view. Ned's heart felt like it was being torn in half, but he stood tall, turning to Cersei again. We are finished here, he said, voice hoarse. Pray you keep your word, or the next time I return, it will not be for Parley. Without waiting for her reply, he mounted his horse and signaled his men. They rode out under the raised portcullis, out from the gatehouse. No crossbows fired, no swords barred their way. The queen had chosen caution, at least for now. Outside the walls, Ned briefed his officers on the arrangement. The Great John scowled, outraged that they would retreat after coming so far. We hold the advantage, he growled. The men will want blood for the Lannisters' crimes. Now we're to move away. Ned understood their frustration, but explained Sansa's peril. I saw her with my own eyes. She's alive but still a hostage. If we press an attack, she'll be the first to die. I have no choice but to keep negotiation open. Roose Bolton, newly arrived to the camp from coordinating with Robb, gave Ned a measured look. A temporary retreat might breed discontent among the men. Are we truly to wait days or weeks while the Lannisters sit behind their walls? Ned's voice was grim. We have no choice but to play Cersei's game for now, or at least pretend to. Meanwhile, we fortify our position 2 leagues north. We'll make it clear we can return at a moment's notice if we see any sign of treachery. We'll also keep scouts watching the roads to ensure no reinforcements slip into King's Landing undetected. And so the army moved, cursing under their breath as they turned away from the looming walls they had hoped to breach. 2 leagues north, they found a broad plain with gentle hills, near a small river. It would serve as a defensible camp. Tents rose again. Siege equipment remained on wagons, perhaps useless if a diplomatic solution was somehow found. Each passing day felt like a torment to Ned, knowing Sansa was still in the Red Keep at Cersei's mercy. He busied himself ensuring the camp was well guarded, meeting with lords and knights to keep morale high, sending messages to Robb about their predicament. Robb's raven replied that Harrenhal had fallen to the north with minimal resistance. Only a skeleton garrison remained after Tywin left. That was good news. The Starks effectively held the largest fortress in the Riverlands. Robb, however, could not march south without risking a gap in their lines that might let Tywin regroup. They needed a swift conclusion at King's Landing or risk letting the war drag on. On the 3rd day after the parley, Ned returned to the city gates at dawn, accompanied by the same 5 men. A gold cloak escorted him through the outer courtyard to a small chamber in the gatehouse tower. There at last, Sansa was brought to him. She appeared slightly better groomed than before, and she rushed to embrace him. They had only a brief time, perhaps an hour, under the watchful eyes of Ser Meryn and a handful of Lannister guards. Ned used the moment to speak softly with Sansa to reassure her that Arya was safe somewhere, that her mother and brothers were alive and well, that the North stood behind her. She confessed her fears that Joffrey might hurt her if Ned attacked the city. She also recounted her loneliness, locked away in rooms with only occasional visits from the Queen or maids who treated her with cold formality. Ned inspected her for bruises or signs of mistreatment but found none aside from her thinness. Relief mingled with fury at her captivity. Before their hour was up, he whispered to her, "I will find a way to free you. If a safe chance arises to escape, take it. But do not risk your life unnecessarily." She nodded tearfully, then was led away by guards. Ned was forced to leave, each step back toward the gate a fresh knife in his heart. The cycle repeated every 3 days, a short, guarded visit with Sansa in the same tower chamber, both father and daughter reluctant to part. Meanwhile, Cersei refused every demand to release her or even allow her to set foot outside the gatehouse. She insisted that Ned disband his entire army before that could happen. Ned refused. Tensions simmered. The city remained shut, the gates barred to Ned's army. Reports indicated that the people of King's Landing grew resentful, short on food, worried about a siege. Street violence flared in Flea Bottom. Joffrey apparently had locked himself in the Red Keep, leaving most affairs to Cersei and the small council. The city watch was overworked, patrolling for potential riots. A fortnight passed in this uneasy stalemate. Ned's men grumbled, wanting an end to the waiting. Every day that dawned without Sansa's release felt like a fresh betrayal of Ned's paternal duty. Yet the memory of that headsman's block in King's Landing haunted him still. He would not hand the Lannisters an excuse to kill Sansa. During one of their short visits, Sansa begged Ned to do something. She was terrified that the king's temper might snap at any moment. And then, on one rainy afternoon, everything changed. A messenger from inside the city, a ragged boy, looking half-starved, slipped into Ned's camp. He carried a crumpled letter with Varys' seal. Ned recognized the spider's subtle signet at once. He took the letter to his private tent and read it with mounting astonishment. "Lord Stark, I have discovered that the boy king grows more unstable each day. His mother's hold on him weakens, and certain factions in the city are prepared to act. The city watch tires of tyranny. If you can mount a swift infiltration of the Red Keep, I will see that the guard opens certain gates and leads you to your daughter. But you must come quietly and quickly with a small force, or all is lost. The spider still weaves for the realm. V." Ned exhaled, remembering how Varys had aided him in escaping the Black Cells. The eunuch's motives were always murky, but he had thus far seemed genuine in wishing to avoid unnecessary bloodshed. This letter hinted at a coup from within. If a portion of the city watch or small council turned on Joffrey and Cersei, Ned could seize the Red Keep from inside, free Sansa, and force a surrender. It was incredibly risky. If this was a trick, Ned could walk into a trap. But if it was real, it might be the best chance yet to rescue his daughter and end the stalemate. He brought the letter to his closest advisors, Roose Bolton, the Great John, and a handful of trusted knights. They debated whether it could be a Lannister deception. But forging Varys' seal and style would be difficult, and the messenger boy seemed sincere, obviously fearful. Eventually, Ned decided it was worth the risk. If Varys orchestrates an opening in the Red Keep's defenses, Ned said, then a small strike force could slip in, find Sansa, and take the Queen and Joffrey by surprise. With the royals in our custody, the city might surrender rather than face a sack. The Great John let out a whoop. "Aye, let us do it, my lord. I'll break down their doors myself." Ned tempered his eagerness. "We have to be discreet. A large force would be noticed. We'll need no more than a few dozen of our best, men who can move quietly and handle themselves in close quarters. Meanwhile, the main army remains outside, ready to exploit any opening or repel a counterattack. If we succeed in capturing Joffrey and Cersei, we can command the city watch to lay down arms." Bolton spoke softly, a ghost of a smile flickering. "An elegant plan. But remember, if it goes wrong, they may kill the girl before you reach her." Ned nodded grimly. He could not banish that possibility. But continuing this stalemate forever was untenable. Cersei would not release Sansa unless Ned disbanded his army. And Ned would never do that. Eventually, the tension would snap one way or the other. Better to seize initiative now, with some help from within. "We try," he said. LSE, we might wait until Joffrey's cruelty claims Sansa anyway. At least this way we have a fighting chance. At dusk, Ned assembled a select group. Experienced knights, stealthy fighters, men who had proven their loyalty beyond doubt. Among them were Tomard Castle, the Great John, and a silent man from the Dread Fort whose skill with a dagger was said to be unmatched. In total, 30 men. They dressed in dull leathers, no bright sigils. If captured, they would be recognized soon enough, but the attempt at subtlety might get them inside. Ned gave final orders. If they did not return by dawn, the army would assume they had failed and must consider alternative measures, perhaps an immediate assault. He embraced Catelyn fiercely. She looked terrified but pressed her hand to Ned's cheek. "Bring her back," she whispered, voice tight with emotion. "Both of you. Come back safely." "We will," Ned promised. Or I'll die trying. They set out under cover of darkness, leaving the main camp in small groups so as not to draw attention. The rain had started again, a fine drizzle. The fields near the city glistened. As they approached the walls, they saw few lights aside from the torches of the guards at the gates. The common folk had retreated indoors, fearful of rumored attacks or simply because the storm discouraged nightly strolls. Varys's letter directed them to a postern gate near the Blackwater's edge, rarely used except by certain keepers and watchmen. They found it, a heavy wooden door set in the outer wall with a narrow flight of stone steps leading up from the muddy bank. By the faint moonlight, Ned saw no sign of watchers. He exchanged a glance with the Grey John, who raised his brow as if to say, now or never. Ned rapped lightly on the door in a pattern described by Varys's note, 3 short knocks, a pause, then 2 more. Nothing. The men crouched in silence, rain trickling down their cloaks. Then, at length, a scraping sound from within. The door edged open. A lantern's glow spilled out, revealing a slight figure in a hooded cloak. It was Varys. He looked around with watery eyes, nodded sharply, and whispered, quickly, "My lords." "This way." Ned slipped inside with the others. They found themselves in a narrow corridor that reeked of damp and old fish. Barrels lined the walls, likely stores of salt fish or other provisions. Varys shut the door behind them, bolting it quietly. "We must move swiftly. The city watch at the main gates remain loyal to the crown, but I've arranged for some loyal men of my own in the Red Keep's corridors. The queen and her son are in Maegor's holdfast, heavily guarded, but we can reach them by the old Targaryen passages. Once we have them, the city watch will bend or break." Ned eyed him warily in the lantern light. "Pray you're not leading us into a trap, Lord Varys." Varys offered a thin, apologetic smile. "I serve the realm, Lord Stark. And at this juncture, the realm's best hope is for a swift resolution. Joffrey's madness grows. Tensions within the city verge on explosion. Better you take him than let the mob storm the keep. Now follow." They wound through winding corridors beneath the Red Keep, labyrinthine passages of stone and shadow. The air was cold and damp. Rats scurried at the edges of their lantern light. Ned kept his sword drawn, half expecting gold cloaks to leap from the dark. But Varys guided them with sure steps, hardly hesitating at each junction. Twice, they encountered a guard, but each time Varys whispered a passphrase, something in the shape of "for the good of the realm," and the guard let them by. Eventually, they emerged into the lower levels of the keep itself. Ned recognized some halls from his time as Hand of the King, though by a different approach. The floors were littered with rushes. The walls hung with tapestries. The men moved in a tense hush, swords at the ready. A single alarmed cry could bring half the Red Keep down upon them. Varys paused at the base of a wide staircase. Maegor's holdfast is up there, across a drawbridge, usually guarded by a dozen knights of the King's Guard or gold cloaks. But tonight some of them have been diverted. You must still act quickly. You'll find the king in the royal apartments or the small audience chamber. The queen has insisted on nightly councils after the fiasco with your visits, Lady Sansa's predicament, and the city's unrest. Ned nodded, adrenaline surging. "Sansa, where is she?" "She's under guard in the tower near the queen's apartments," Varys said softly. "I'll lead you there first, but once we retrieve her, we must strike quickly at Joffrey. If the alarm is raised, we'll have to fight our way out." So they ascended, hearts pounding. At the top, they found a single gold cloak dozing by a heavy oak door. Before the guard fully registered their presence, Ned's men closed in. One knight pressed a dagger to his throat, whispering, "Make a sound and you die." The guard's eyes bulged. He shook his head frantically. Ned eased the door open. Inside was a modest but comfortable suite. By the faint candlelight, he saw Sansa curled up on a chaise, apparently asleep. Another guard dozed on a stool nearby. Tomard Castle slipped forward like a shadow, covering the guard's mouth and placing a blade at his throat. The man woke with a muffled gasp, eyes wild. Tomard swiftly disarmed him. Ned rushed to Sansa's side. "Sansa," he whispered, touching her shoulder. She stirred, blinking in confusion. Then her eyes widened as she recognized him. "Father?" she breathed, her voice trembling with hope and fear. "Quiet," Ned murmured, helping her to her feet. He could see she was thin, her cheeks tear-stained, her eyes hollow with worry, but she was alive and unharmed. He pulled her close in a brief hug. "We're here to take you away from this place." She clutched at him, tears shining. I was so frightened. Is it really you?" He nodded, wanting to linger in that moment but knowing time was critical. He turned to the captured guard. "If you want to live, you will remain silent and do as we say." "Where's the rest of the guard?" "2 more down the corridor," the guard whispered, quaking. "Patrolling." Ned looked at Varys, who nodded, then led the group back into the hall. Sansa clung to Ned's arm. The guard outside was bound and gagged, left hidden behind a tapestry. 2 of Ned's knights slipped quietly down the corridor to neutralize the patrolling gold cloaks. Moments later, they returned, blood staining their blades. "The corridor is clear," one whispered. "But not for long." We heard voices in the next hall. Varys pressed a finger to his lips. "Time is short. If the queen is in council, we can surprise her and the king. This way." They crept through a winding passage, listening for footsteps. Sansa's breath trembled against Ned's ear. He squeezed her hand reassuringly. The men fanned out, swords ready. Lightning flashed outside the windows, illuminating the corridor in stark relief. Thunder growled. They reached a set of double doors with carved lions on them, no doubt an antechamber to the queen's private audience hall. Varys listened at the door, then gestured that he heard voices. Ned nodded to his knights. The Greatjon crouched, ready to charge. On Ned's signal, they burst in. Chaos erupted. The chamber was lit by tall candelabras. Around a heavy table sat Joffrey in his gilded finery, Cersei in a deep green dress, Pycelle blinking in surprise, Petyr Baelish half-rising, and 3 gold cloaks stationed by the walls. Joffrey's eyes went wide, then twisted with rage. "Guards!" Before he could finish, Ned's men overpowered 2 of the gold cloaks, disarming them with swift efficiency. The third died with a sword thrust through his chest, collapsing in a heap. Petyr Baelish dove for a corner, hands raised as if to show he was unarmed. Pycelle toppled backwards, stammering about betrayal. Cersei scrambled up, backing away. "What is the meaning of this?" she hissed. Joffrey reached for a dagger, but a northern knight seized him by the collar, forcing him away from the table. The boy king struggled, face contorting. "Unhand me. I am your king." Ned stepped forward with Sansa clinging to him. "You are no true king," Ned said quietly, "and we've come to end this farce. Order your men to stand down, or I will see you dethroned this very night." Cersei's features twisted. "You dare?" She halted as she saw the row of swords pointed at Joffrey's chest. If she gave the order to fight, Joffrey would die before help arrived. Ned could see the fury and panic warring in her eyes. "You put a knife to the king's throat? Then you are truly a traitor." Joffrey spat at Ned, but the Greatjon squeezed Joffrey's arm painfully, subduing him. "Careful, pup, or you'll lose that pretty tongue." Sansa trembled, looking at her former betrothed with a mixture of terror and revulsion. "He's monstrous," she whispered. Ned shot her a sympathetic glance. Then he addressed the queen. "Call off your guards. Command the city watch to lay down arms. Surrender yourself and your son to the mercy of the realm, and no harm will come to you this night. Refuse, and we'll see how many men are willing to die for a king whose true parentage is questionable." Cersei's face was pale. Her gaze flicked to Baelish as if seeking a plan. Baelish merely gave a tiny shrug, half smiling. She turned to Pycelle, who looked utterly useless, mouth opening and closing like a fish. The sound of distant shouting drifted in, likely from guards who had discovered the intrusion. "Mother!" Joffrey shrieked, voice cracking with panic. "Kill them! Summon the guards!" But if Cersei commanded them to attack, Joffrey would be dead in an instant. Ned saw the calculation in her eyes. She was cornered. With trembling hands, she slowly lowered herself into the seat again, glaring at Ned. "You realize this is a coup," she hissed. "The might of the Lannisters will come down upon you." The might of the Lannisters was broken at the Red Fork and again when Tywin fled Harrenhal, Ned said. "You have no relief force. The city is on the brink of revolt. Your best hope now is to yield." Joffrey, spittle on his lips, tried to bite the Greatjon's arm, which earned him a cuff to the head. He let out a yelp, tears of frustrated rage gathering in his eyes. Cersei looked at her son, shaking. "You have no right," she whispered to Ned, but the fire in her eyes was dimming. Ned signaled to one of his knights. "Go to the corridor, signal the rest to secure the area." He glared at Baelish, who had yet to move. "You. Stand by the queen. Try anything and you die." Baelish gave that practiced smirk. "I'm only a humble counselor, my lord. I do not question your steel." A pounding of feet outside. A handful of gold cloaks burst in, swords drawn, only to freeze at the sight of the queen and king held at sore point. Ned's knights quickly disarmed them, forcing them to their knees. One of them sputtered, We serve the king. The king is in our custody, Ned said coldly. Lay down your arms or share his fate. They dropped their blades, shuffling nervously. More footsteps approached, and within minutes, the corridor was crowded with city watchmen, many uncertain, some looking furious, others relieved. News spread that Eddard Stark had seized the Boy King. A hush fell. The watch commander, a pot-bellied man in gold cloak finery, pushed to the front. He eyed the swords at Joffrey's throat and sighed heavily. We only want to keep the peace, he said in a trembling voice. Then keep it, Ned replied. Disarm, stand down, and no harm will come to you or the city. Attempt any resistance and your king dies. Spread the word. Joffrey spluttered, face going red. Mother, do something. Cut them down. But Cersei, hands clenched white on the table, said nothing. At length, she nodded jerkily at the watch commander. Stand down, she whispered, voice hollow. For now. Relief and shock flickered through the gold cloaks. Some dropped to their knees, discarding helmets in awe or terror. The hush in the chamber was deafening, broken only by the patter of rain on the windows. Ned exhaled. It was not over yet, but a crucial threshold had been crossed. Sansa pressed closer to him, tears of relief shining in her eyes. He squeezed her hand. So many times he had imagined saving her from this cursed city, and now she stood at his side, though chaos still reigned in the corridors. The realm's destiny might well pivot on what happened in the next hours. Cersei glared at Ned, voice laced with venom. You think you have one? Stannis will claim the throne. Or Renly. Or someone else. The realm will tear itself apart. Ned's expression was grim. Perhaps. But I would rather see the throne passed by rightful law than left to a mad boy not fit to rule. We will call a great council. The lords of the 7 kingdoms shall decide the next king. Whether it is Stannis, Renly, or another, so be it. Joffrey's shrill rant was cut short when the great Jon growled at him to hold his tongue. Pycelle whimpered in the corner. Baelish watched with cunning eyes, no doubt already calculating his next move. Sansa breathed unevenly, eyes darting from Joffrey to her father. Please, take me away from here, she whispered, voice barely audible. I can't stay another night in this horrible place. Ned nodded. We will, sweetling, but we must ensure we leave no pockets of Lannister resistance behind us. Give us a little time. Varys emerged from behind the cluster of Ned's men, offering a small, enigmatic bow. My lords, if we might quiet the rest of the keep, ensure the stable gates are secured, we can avoid further bloodshed. Some of the watchmen are prepared to let your army inside if you wish. Or you could hold the Red Keep with minimal men, while the city's populace remains calm. Ned studied Varys, reading the subtle triumph in the eunuch's eyes. Indeed, Varys had orchestrated a quiet coup. We will open the gates, Ned decided. We will bring in a contingent of men to secure the city. Order the watch to keep the peace. Let the people know the Starks do not mean to harm them. A flicker of relief crossed Varys's face. As you wish, my lord. I will see it done. For a moment, Ned stood there, drenched in rainwater and sweat, sword in hand, capturing the crown's seat without a formal battle. He thought of Robert Baratheon, the man who had once seized King's Landing from the Targaryens. Now it fell to Ned Stark, not for personal glory, but to rescue his daughter and end a false reign. The irony was staggering. He turned to Sansa, helping her sit. You're safe now, he repeated softly, letting her cling to him as she wept tears of relief. He felt his own eyes burn with emotion long suppressed. This had been his singular goal since that day on the Red Keep scaffold, and finally he had her. Alive. Free. It felt surreal. Outside in the corridors, the sounds of men scurrying, swords clattering, and the occasional shout indicated that Ned's strike force was consolidating control. The Great Jon barked orders, ensuring no Lannister loyalists could gather enough men to counterattack. A few pockets of resistance might remain, but with the king and queen captive, they had no rallying point. Then came the moment of final confrontation. Joffrey, pinned in place, spat, "You'll pay for this. My grandfather will march on this city with fire and sword. My uncle Jaime." "Your father is your uncle," the Great Jon muttered under his breath, prompting a bark of laughter from some of the Northmen. Joffrey shrieked curses, face red. Cersei remained silent, shaking with fury. Ned stepped forward. I will not harm you if you yield the throne and accept the judgment of a great council. Those who wish to speak for you, let them come. But Sansa is coming with me and no Lannister will stop me. His voice resonated in the hush, each word weighted by the memory of his near execution and the months of war. Cersei stared at him with unbridled hatred. Finally, she drew a long breath and spoke as if each word cost her blood. Very well, she said. We have no choice. She looked upon Joffrey, tears threatening. Forgive me, my sweet boy. Joffrey howled, struggling, but the great Jon gripped him harder. Ned raised his sword, noticing how the boy king shrank back from the cold steel. Commander, Ned called to the city watch officer who hovered uncertainly near the door. You will send word to the gates. Let a small contingent of my men inside. The rest will remain outside until we can secure peace. If anyone attempts violence, they answer to me. The watch commander bowed. Yes, my lord. Baelish, stepping forward carefully, splayed his hands in a gesture of reason. Lord Stark, if I might be so bold, the city is a powder keg. Flooding it with an army might incite panic. Best to keep your men to a minimum and swiftly restore order. And remember, you will need the nobles of the council if you wish any smooth transition of power. Ned eyed him, aware Baelish's cunning mind was always seeking advantage. You'll get your wish, no sacking of the city, no pointless bloodshed if you do not interfere. But make no mistake, Baelish, if you try to betray me again, you'll find the cost is high. Baelish's smile did not reach his eyes. I only serve the best interests of the realm, Lord Stark. Perhaps that aligns with yours for the moment. With that uneasy understanding, they set about the next steps. Ned's men took Joffrey, Cersei, and Pycelle into custody, placing them under guard in separate chambers. Ned insisted on humane treatment. He would not descend to cruelty, but he posted loyal knights at every door. Varys flitted through corridors, coordinating the city watch to stand down. By the time the night ended, dawn's first rays found King's Landing in a state of stunned quiet, the Red Keep under Stark control, the Lannister monarch deposed in all but name. Ned sat in the throne room, still the same forbidding hall of swords, shadowy and vast. He did not seat himself upon the Iron Throne. Instead, he stood at its base, Sansa by his side, as key watch officers and courtiers ventured forward, bowing nervously. Cersei was absent, confined in her chambers with guards. Joffrey's outraged screams had subsided into sullen silence hours ago. Pycelle was left to bluster in a corner. Baelish lingered, watchful as ever. Varys hovered, half smiling. Looking at the monstrous metal throne, Ned felt no desire to claim it. He turned to the gathered lords, raising his voice so all could hear. Henceforth, Joffrey Baratheon is stripped of all royal prerogatives until a great council of the realm can be convened to judge his claim. The Queen Regent is likewise stripped of power. Any who remain loyal to them may stand aside peacefully or face the justice of the North. The City Watch shall maintain order under my oversight until the council meets. A ripple of whispers coursed through the onlookers. Some seemed relieved, others fearful. Nobles rarely saw coups end with so little blood. Ned gestured to Sansa. My daughter, Lady Sansa Stark, was held hostage by Joffrey's command. Now she stands free. Let all know House Stark will not tolerate tyranny or harm to its own. He did not mention the deeper truths of Joffrey's parentage, not yet. That would come in the Great Council with the entire realm to bear witness. He turned to Sansa, who blinked tearfully, overwhelmed by the enormity of the moment. He gently placed a hand on her shoulder, feeling relief and pride swirl within him. After months of terror, they were together, the Lannisters' hold broken. Not by a blind charge or an indiscriminate slaughter, but by a cunning infiltration and the vulnerability Joffrey and Cersei themselves had created with their cruelty and arrogance. In the hush of that vast throne room, father and daughter shared a brief smile, their eyes meeting in quiet understanding. Where still loomed in the greater realm, Stannis might soon march to claim his rights, Renly might declare himself, Tywin might lash out from the Westerlands. But for now, in this moment, Eddard Stark had wrested his child from the jaws of death, and the city that had nearly destroyed him now lay under his reluctant stewardship. The promise he'd made so long ago, kneeling on that scaffold, echoed in his heart. He had lived, he had fought, and he had come for her. As the sun's rays broke through the high windows, illuminating the swords fused into the Iron Throne, Ned Stark exhaled, finally allowing himself a moment of fragile hope. House Stark was wounded but not broken. Sansa stood by him, alive and free. Arya was out there somewhere, hopefully safe, and the rest of his children waited far to the north. He had survived King's Landing, escaped, and returned triumphant. Though the storms of war gathered on every horizon, though the realm might yet face trials to come, For now, at least, Ned could hold his daughter's hand and know that in this one victory, House Stark had prevailed. And so long as they persevered together, there was a chance for peace, a chance for the realm to heal from the wounds of treachery, cruelty, and false kings. He took Sansa's hand in his own. "We'll go home, little one," he whispered so only she could hear. "One day soon, we'll return to Winterfell, and all of this will be behind us." She nodded, eyes brimming, and gripped his hand tightly in return. High above them, the light continued to stream in, casting a pale golden glow across the cold metal blades of the throne and the silent watchers in the hall. The war was far from over. But for father and daughter, for House Stark, this was a moment of triumph wrested from the heart of darkness. And it was enough, if only for now.